once again, thanks to those who have joined us a few minutes early. I'll get started in 2 or 3 minutes. There are a couple of resources up in the nest, some interesting OSINT tools that you might want to check out in the meantime. Okay, it's just gone 9 o'clock. I'll get started. Thank you very much for joining us. For those who haven't been to these spaces before, I hold these conversations every Thursday night, 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and each Sunday afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. This space is to discuss developments in the news, but as informed by the best open source reporting that's mainly drawn from Twitter to accent it, because I find there's a lot of detail that doesn't make its way into most reporting. But in addition to following the news, we also work to introduce tools and techniques to the audience so that everybody's skill comes up. That way, if you are not doing any investigation of your own, hopefully you might be inspired to begin. If you already are, we'll hopefully sharpen your skills. And then finally, we do try to invite people who are working on projects to come and share with us what they're working on. And in that way, we hope to inspire people to reach out, network, collaborate, and make the whole community richer. This space relies fairly heavily on use of the nest, which is the window at the top of the space's screen, where you can put tweets. And so, of course, you can click those tweets and it will link through, open the tweet up for you, so you can follow along. Tonight, if you scroll all the way to the right side of the nest, that's the tweet that is the invite for this space. Below that invite, I have a long thread. It's where I put essentially my speaking notes, but it also has all the sources in that. I like to try to back up most of what I present with the source, both so that you don't have to take my word for it, but also so that if you want to dig into a matter further, you have a starting point. But that schedule or agenda is aspirational. I have a tendency of putting more content there than we can work through. I generally run the space for 3 hours. If we don't get to the last subject, then that's fine. We'll just move it forward to a future space. To that end, you can read ahead on the agenda, and if anything catches your eye, it may generate a comment or a question. Feel free when we get to that point in the conversation to come up and chat with us. You can do that by hitting the mic button. It's in the bottom left of the spaces window, and we really do encourage your contribution. We like to get a conversation going where we can. So the topics we were hoping to touch on tonight, I always do a bit of an intro on open source resources and tools. There just happen to be a lot more tonight than there tended to be, so I've put it sort of as a standalone, as it may run a little while longer. We wanted to do a bit of a conversation about the situation with political prisoners, particularly in Russia. We try to, as much as we're on the breaking events, there are topics that are important that don't tend to get coverage, but that the developments in that subject area sort of build up with time, and that people might not be familiar with the state of things. And so this issue of political prisoners is one of those where we're just hoping to bring people up to speed. Then we'll run through several just sort of miscellaneous recent developments in Ukraine. That may actually fill out our time because there was a lot to talk about tonight. If we can get through it, then another sort of background issue we wanted to discuss are efforts at intimidation abroad by Russia, Iran, and China, because while it's an ongoing issue, there have been developments on that front with each of them in the last week or so. So that's the broad agenda. The second item from the right in the nest happens to be an invitation for Sunday's conversation, Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. If you enjoy our chat now, you can always set a reminder and join us again then. The third item from the right is our community calendar, which we've developed because the Spaces calendar or Spaces search feature is not very good at all. We have some friends we've made through hosting Spaces in these last, 14 months now. And we wanted them all on a calendar so that we wouldn't double book ourselves, but also so that we wouldn't forget and we could, drop into lots of interesting talks. They're generally focused on either the events in Ukraine or on open source intelligence. We added to that some outside conversations, outside events, most of them talks held by universities and think tanks. If you click on an entry in that calendar, it will usually open to a registration page. If the event has happened, there is usually a recording. A couple of events that are coming up in the next couple of days, there is a book release for a book called Open Source Intelligence in the Google Age, and several OSINT analysts that I follow have highlighted it as a good resource. For example, the lead of the visual investigations team at the New York Times, and this tweet is from Hans Christensen, who's a nuclear weapons researcher. They endorse it, so it looks like it may be an interesting book, and it will have its release party that I think has accompanying talks. This one's actually just passed, but earlier this week, friends of our space, it's a group called Tochny. They hold conversations that are focused just on events in Ukraine, and they had on as a guest Andras Toth-Sivra, who is a political analyst, and they had a great back and forth about recent developments there, so you may enjoy that recording. Just today, there was a hearing held by the U.S. Congress's Helsinki Commission. The purpose of the commission is to coordinate diplomatic relations with European allies, and they held their hearing on church, state, and Russia's war on Ukraine. And occasionally in our spaces, we have done updates on developments on regulation of churches, the influence of or use of the Moscow Patriarch churches in Ukraine to try to influence politics there, that there are connections to Russian intelligence in some cases. And so that was congressional committee's hearing on the matter. I know I spoke with some people who listened to it today. They said that the content was interesting, but that they had some significant technical difficulties. And so you may enjoy it. If it's a topic that interests you, you might need some patience just listening to the recording as they work through their issues there. Bellingcat has an event this week. Elliot Higgins is speaking, and the reason this caught my attention is that occasionally they've had Bellingcat events talking about the history of Bellingcat, In this case, I understand that Elliot, in addition to talking about the founding of the organization and their current efforts, also is speaking to some of their their intention for future development. Finally, in terms of events, this may be more a podcast, but I thought was interesting. Lloyd's of London, which is one of the largest shipping insurance companies, has a podcast, and their latest episode was about why shipping is not ready for sanctions enforcement, and that sort of previews some of the conversation we may get into later, which is that while sanctions have finally started to have some teeth, a lot of the focus now has shifted from can we expand sanctions to we're starting to see where the existing sanctions policies have leaks, and that enforcement is becoming the focus in many countries. And in Lloyd's opinion, the shipping industry might not be used to strictly enforced sanctions, and that will present some challenges to the industry. So in terms of podcasts, I'll just mention these quickly. It's the third tweet in the nest, third from the left. And so there are some regular podcasts that we highlight in these spaces, including Geopolitics Decanted. In that case, they're talking about the chip production war with China. There was an episode put out this week of the Russia contingency, which is hosted by Michael Kaufman, who's one of the foremost Russian military analysts. And this episode was actually more of a historical look, looking at the Russian Imperial Army and whether it has any connection to the structure or mentality of the current Russian military. And I know that among us there are some history enthusiasts, so you might like that episode. Although, reminder that the Russian contingency, I believe, is subscription-based, so you have to be subscribed to it. There was a talk put on by the Deputy Minister for Technology Security in Ukraine, and that talk was on cyber resilience in Ukraine. And again, we've covered several of the cyber, offensive cyber issues here in the space, so you may enjoy that conversation. Okay. There are a couple more quick ones. There was a podcast put out. The podcast title is Next Year in Moscow. And this particular episode was about the social impact on people within Russia. This is a podcast that's produced by The Economist magazine. And so we don't, at least I don't see that many pieces of content that are focused on sort of what is the mood in Russia from people with great connections on the ground. And that was the subject of that interview. There's also an entry there from Bellingcat, one of Bellingcat's researchers, Eric Toller, whose work we've been following in particular the last 2 weeks in connection with the Discord leaks. He appeared on a podcast called Angry Planet. And while he's been on several podcasts to discuss his research into the leaks and their implications, in this case, he took a little bit different tack on it, and he had a conversation about the culture on Discord. And so in the last couple of days, evidence has made it clear that the leaker, or that it appears the leaker did not act for ideological reasons, but rather acted more for ego reasons. And so the culture online generally, and on some of these Discord voice chats in particular, it's a bit of a different environment. And so you may not be familiar with what some of those environments are like, and you might enjoy that podcast. Finally, this one got a lot of attention. It is, and I'll even break this one out separately, Into the Nest. It's put on by, I believe, a Danish newspaper, and they're producing podcasts. These ones are in English, and the subject matter is about events in the Baltic Sea. In particular, this podcast episode was about Russian spying and seabed warfare, which came to the forefront in the last week or so, with photos coming out of that Russian sort of special mission ship that appears to be traveling around and doing a lot of surveillance of undersea infrastructure. And so this episode is all about that. Okay. Jacoby, I see your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, I just wanted to welcome everybody to the space and ask if you would mind retweeting it out if you are enjoying what we're about to talk about and want to have other people to come in and take part in the conversation too. Also, I wonder if we could just bring up Random as co-host.
Sure, I'll do that now. And so thanks for everybody's patience in my running through the calendar and the podcasts. I know that, for many of you, you may not be interested, but I think there's a lot of value in trying to bring together as many of the resources on events in Ukraine into one place as possible, just because there's such a wealth of it going on that until I started intentionally trying to look for it, I probably was missing at least half, including some of the more niche, detail-oriented pieces. Jacoby.
Yeah, I just wanted to reinforce that because someone earlier today had asked me about a couple of the resources, in particular some of the cyber detective resources that you highlight. So I was sharing some of that back and forth with them and mentioned that you probably would have some additional resources to share today, and they liked being direct, having a place to come and hear more about it in your spaces, and also having that steady stream from a resource like Cyber Detective, easy to find.
Well, in just a moment, we have Cyber Detective puts out so many great resources. We, of course, have another one to point out today. And when I present these, so, a moment ago I was apologizing for, thanks for sticking with me while I ran through all of them. I know it can be a lot. I'm sure there are some people on the other side who would like to have a slower explanation of what some of the contents of these are, but it's striking that balance. And so my default is to highlight them just enough that you can get a sense of what they are, and then the links are there to be explored. Of course, if you have a particular interest in any specific event or topic, I am trying to get people to contribute, their own presentations or come up with questions. So you can always do that. If there's something that you're particularly interested in, if you would like to come to the space, particularly if you were going to prepare, just like a 5 or 10 minute presentation, then I think that's something I'd like to get into more and more, is having people sort of be chipping in where they find a subject they're interested in, they go away and learn about it for about a week, and then come back for 5 or 10 minutes and update the whole group on it. In that way, I wanted to get into the resources, which is it's the fourth item back in the nest now. So it's the tweet titled Resources Number 1. And last week, so in keeping with last week, we had JJ come up and explain to us the video series produced by Agence France Presse on their fact-checking, which was a set of short, 2-minute videos. There were about a dozen of them. Along those same lines, ID10T had reached out, and this week Benjamin Strick, who's a well-known OSINT researcher, put out a list of great resources. ID10T had a look at that, and he then picked out one resource called My OSINT Training. So I'm wondering if you can just tell us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Yeah, so there's these pages called start.me. Hey, quick audio check. Am I sounding okay?
Yeah, coming through loud and clear.
All right. So there's about 90,000 start.me pages where it's a collage of information. You can go onto one page and it will have a subsection that is for GeoInt, subsection that is for YouTube searches, subsection that is for face search engines. But let me add my little post to the space here. But what I found was this search engine that will scrape all of these pages, and you can actually search for, let's say, toolbox. And as soon as I can find it in here in the space, could have had another minute. But you can enter into your search. I did a search for toolbox, and that brought me to a page of Journalist Toolbox. And within Journalist Toolbox was a list of scraping Twitter, scraping Facebook, info leaks, and one particular easy one caught my eye was a Google Chrome extension called Treeverse. And Treeverse allows me to go to a thread on Twitter, and I can click on the extension Treeverse, and it will show me the original poster, anyone that's replied from that, and anyone that has replied from that. And it will build that tree of everybody that's been involved with that. So that's one tool on one page on one Start Me file among 90,000. There are a lot of tools, and having problems adding it to the nest, but that should put it in perspective of just how much is out there. And if you give me a minute, I'm going to step off to the side for a minute while I get this going. I'm having some technical issues here.
Sure. And just to reiterate, if you have a look in that tweet titled Resources Number 1 under ID10T, you'll find the link he's referring to. So it's smart.myosint.training. And essentially, it's just a giant index of topics you can learn about, and then links both to Twitter and to just websites more generally. And we'll get back to ID10T on that in just a moment. Jacoby, did you want to go ahead?
Oh, I just wondered if ID10T, if you had tried to use this particular tool and how you thought of its functionality.
Now that I have it up in the space, first one I put up here is a screenshot of the search engine and the way the search is going to appear. And you can see that I did a search for toolbox. And the second one is a link to the journalist toolbox that I selected. And moving on, there's the link to the Chrome extension. And down the rabbit hole, here is a picture. I selected randomly a link from another space. And you can click on that picture and actually see the tree that it developed from the Myra report. I just clicked on the posting of here's the space, and you can see the original at the top of the tree. Those who retweeted it, those who retweeted it, and those who retweeted the retweets. So it built the tree. And again, let me emphasize, this is just one tool on one page from one smart.me out of almost 90,000. There are a lot of tools.
Well, that's really handy. I had never heard about this until you came across it. Did you find this in the Ben Strick tweet this week, or did you just come across this on your own?
No, I was actually compiling a list of smart.me pages, and during that time of building, I had about 1,000 different pages, and it was just how is this happening? There's no way anybody's going to go through everything. I'm trying to compile this information, and I started digging, and I found a guy on Reddit that built this scraper, smart.me, and well, that simplifies the past 3 days of work I've been doing. I can just search it all. So I just happened to come across it.
Jacoby, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I wanted to, have you come across something like this before, or is this sort of a unique tool that you've not seen be able to compile trees of, related trees like this before?
Well, I think the Treeverse, as far as an extension goes, pretty simple. And it just it takes a look at Twitter and it sees what it is. Now, it does give you a good graphic representation of who has their fingers in the cookie jar. And that can be helpful, especially in the past number of weeks when we had a number of internet personalities doing some things, and it would have been nice to know who had their fingers on it. You can just click the extension and see that. But going back up a little bit, going to the journalist toolbox, there is a slew of tools on there. That is, it's very interesting of what's all out there. And if you start digging a little bit, you can do a search for YouTube. You can do a search for Twitter. You can do a search for satellite, GeoInt, maps. I have pages for map tools, help you build maps. Radius should send it to Intel Schizo because he wants map stuff. Just because I use the search function and just place map in it. So it's scouring these pages. There's so many people out there that have done so much work in finding links and resources and GitHubs and abilities, different search engines, pages and pages of them. But no one has the time in their life to go through all those pages. Boom, you got a search function. It's the difference of walking into a room full of newspapers or using Google.
Yeah, and the availability of all of these tools really changes the challenge to, which ones are the best. How long does it take you to learn all of these functions? As I run through these other resources that I've found this week in just a moment, I think so the last couple of weeks, I have been at the stage of learning what resource collections are out there. And because it's such a huge field, I haven't sort of been processing it down into what are the best tools? How do you learn? How can you possibly learn the tools, at any kind of a rate that would allow you to, sort of have mastery comprehensively? It's a huge question. I know that others are working on it as well and probably have some partial solutions. So unfortunately, I can't present them to you in terms of, here's a how-to guide to learn all of these different fields, but I'm hoping to search for more of that overview, explanatory type of material. If anybody listening knows people who have really done that, because there are lots of great videos, and I've mentioned several times Benjamin Strick, who, for example, on his YouTube channel has a lot of introductory sort of conceptually, here's how OSINT is done. But if people have gotten to the point of doing an overview at the individual tool level and saying, here are your top 3 in this type of search, here are your top 3 in this other type of search, and then also here are the how-to guides to learn the tools, that's what I would like to try to find, and it may not exist, so it may take some building, but that's just my sharing sort of the broader way I plan to approach it with y'all. And so to this end, I had never heard of this Start Me, at the URL of smart.myosint.training. So I'm glad that you brought this up, ID10T. Maybe we'll make this one a recurring segment of what did you find on this site every week or so. I presume, was that all you had? Was the intro to the idea, and then we can all go out and play around with it, and if we find great tools, we can come back and present to the group?
Absolutely, I would agree.
Okay.
I did add one more to the list and to the nest, and that is a picture of the baseline start.me page, and that's what you'll find thousands of pages of. So that's where the you can see in that picture the subcategories. You would have to open up each page affiliated with whatever you're looking for and find which link you would want. So the search engine greatly simplifies the situation and gets you to where you want to go if you know where you want to look.
And so it's both with, you look at it and you have great excitement at all the possibility, and then you think about, wow, that's going to be a lot of work to understand and sort of try and present it thoughtfully in a way that a mass audience can follow. But anyway, great resource. Thanks for bringing it to our attention. We'll go to Jacoby and then Sam. Go ahead, Jacoby.
I'll defer to Sam. I just had a question about the relationship it had with Chrome, so I'd be happy to hear from Sam before that.
Go ahead, Sam.
Okay. Thank you, Mark. I got a question. So when you use this, it brings up current information. I mean, like somebody posts something right now, if you're tracking, okay. And Michael, you didn't answer my question on Sunday that I PM'd you, but you know what I'm thinking. Can this be used in the wrong way? Can it be used to track movements or whatever? I don't know if I agree with it.
Well, if I can clarify, this tool set is just a search engine of other people's work that they have compiled information on. There has been a person that has a page, a start.me page, and they have compiled a series of links to various tools that interest them. One page might be devoted to map tools. Another page is devoted to various Google searches, and Google searches that are centered for, it's amazing Google foo out there, but catered to and perfected to particular type of searches. Another page is for maritime. Another page is for satellite information. This search tool allows you to search everybody else's work that have developed these pages. Now, what user discretion is advised. These are other people's links, third-party links. There's a lot of information out there. If there is something that is nefarious, then by all means report it. But this is scouring the net, much like a Google search, for other people's work. So just be mindful that you are clicking hyperlinks to third and fourth party entities. So user discretion is advised.
That's a great point, and maybe more. So that's a point to caution for the user, more particularly to Sam's question, where Sam is concerned about the potential, in particular for detailed Ukrainian information to get out there. These tools exist on the internet, and so just sort of like any tool, even if it was just Google, we're hoping that people use them for good, but we can't control people in that way. And these tools exist. So I think it's better to make the the good guys aware of them than it is to keep it under a rock. Where it's still possible for people to use them for bad reasons. But we can't really prevent that in the end, in any event. And you're free to, maybe take a different opinion, but that's how we're going to operate. Apologies, I didn't see the order. I'll go with Allsource and then Artemis. Go ahead, Allsource.
Yeah, I always go ahead of Artemis. Come on, man. Come on. We all know the truth. I love you, Artemis. It's grammar. You'll always be grammar. So, Sam, you bring up an excellent point. So this tool, I have not known about this tool, but I will say the moment you download Telegram, for example, there's a specific tool that is utilized a lot in the OSINT community that is able to geolocate users just based on Telegram, right? I have personally used it myself for certain projects that I've had done. It has not been as effective for me because Telegram is not something that is widely utilized in Mexico for cartels. But in the Ukraine-Russia conflict, yes. And actually, a lot of times that's how people try to figure out the front lines and where they're at, right? And so I think people just need to be very cognizant that there's a plethora of tools out there that are utilized that are able to geolocate people, and you just have to be very aware and cognizant of it. But that's just generally just how our society operates. These tools are very useful for research, but there's always a concern of privacy that I think is acknowledged. And I know of specific tools that are utilized. I don't know how. I know of one. There's one specific I know that is kind of kept under wrap of people trying to make sure that it has not been used for abuse because it is potential. But I would just say anybody here with Telegram, just be aware that there are tools out there that could just automatically geolocate you based on your usage of Telegram.
Yep. So that warning applies broadly and also specifically, as all sources pointed out. Grammar.
Just before we go to grammar real quick, I just wanted a quick follow-up. Would you suggest VPNs in that situation?
That's an interesting question. I believe I would have to. I haven't used this tool in a while simply because it was not useful for me. I do believe VPN might help in kind of breaking up because it provides geolocation on users of Telegram, right? So I don't necessarily, because the beauty of Telegram is that you can hide a lot of your information, right? But your username is what's available. I don't know how VPN might break it up. I would assume it would. But I'm not an expert on that because it's just a tool that I briefly touched upon, tried to use it on a couple of projects that I had, was not that helpful, so I stopped, to be honest. So random, I can't give you a definitive answer, but I'm assuming VPN would help.
Grammar, would you like to go ahead?
Source, would you like me as a copywriter and internet marketing guru to put out some targeted ads in Mexico for Telegram? I think that might help you quite a bit. Maybe there's something like this for WhatsApp. But anyway, what the hell was I going to say? Oh, yeah.
I can't hear grammar. Am I the only one?
She's coming through for me, all source, so you might need to just drop, but we'll bring you back up if you'd like.
I'll drop.
God, that's so unsatisfying that he can't hear. Anyway, oh yeah, okay. So regarding I don't know if Sam was talking about anything regarding like OPSEC and PERSEC and all that specifically, but usually that's what people have expressed concern about whenever I talk about OSINT tools and stuff. But I mean, just in general, like bad actors. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, it can be sort of helpful, but they're gonna find that anyway. And I think it was Michael who mentioned it, that I'd rather have these tools easily accessible for quote unquote the good people as well. It's almost more important to have it for them because, I mean, I don't know, maybe I'm just a little bit confirming my cognitive bias. I don't know, but I believe there's more of us than there are of them, first of all, but also the broader point I want to make is that, yeah, tools are helpful, tools are great, but they're only as good as the person using them and the information that is input, like your data and social engineering and all that. Like it's a way bigger than just having a tool that essentially just makes it way easier to do your job. So that's a big part of it. And then most people who do OSINT and stuff, at least, the non-bad actors, are generally very sensitive about anything like that could be OPSEC related, stuff like that. So, yeah.
We are
all source. You missed it earlier, but Artemis was asking if.
Oh yeah, can you hear me?
Or
I can hear you now. I figured she was talking shit because I saw a lot of laughing emojis.
No, I was actually being helpful. I offered my copywriting and internet marketing skills to put targeted ads out in Mexico for the cartel. Well, obviously I wouldn't be like, hey, cartel, but it would be for Telegram, so that way you could use this tool more.
You know what's funny? I'm sorry, if I may segue a little bit on this, but and this is an issue with Twitter, right? It's like there's inherently a belief that the more followers you have, the more credibility that equals for people's perception. Oh, he has more followers, meaning he has more credibility, which is not true. However, the benefit for me when I do this is that people see I have followers, I have a lot more followers, I'm growing. So people actually tag me either openly, so they become like a source open, hey, this is what, please share my material. Or I start getting people DMing me who want to be anonymous, right? And it's funny is that the people who tag me probably the most openly to share content are cartel members. 100%, no question. There's if you go to my Twitter and if you scroll down a little bit, there's a video I shared about a ghillie suit. The guy's wearing ghillie camo, CG&G. That dude is openly on his bio CG&G, claims it, happy, doesn't care. But the people who want to remain anonymous are generally the people that live in the area that are more concerned, right, of just retaliation from the cartels, right? And so it's almost as if a lot of the things that I'm trying to do right now, I don't have to really look hard. Or I don't have to go as in depth as other accounts, because in other areas you're talking about, OPSEC, wars, etc. I don't have those constraints in what I cover. Sometimes they'll do some OPSEC measures and delete an account, but then they open one up quickly, and then you can just kind of and you find them. So that's why a lot of these tools, it's just not a necessity for me, right? It's just not that requirement. What it would be awesome, where I think it would be very beneficial, but I will also get bombarded is, if that tool for Telegram, there was conversations, they would use it for WhatsApp. And if anybody knows anything about Hispanic culture and Mexicans specifically, is you have WhatsApp. That is how people talk. WhatsApp. So then, but the problem is, God help you trying to just geolocate with WhatsApp, because the moment you put something on a 2-mile radius, you're going to get 10,000 hits. And it's oh shit, how the fuck am I going to draw this down? But it's just Telegram in itself, not widely used, but I really just don't have the necessity, which is the irony of this entire situation.
Well, it's a terrific idea to try to get more cartel members onto Telegram to help AllSource out. And I absolutely agree with you, AllSource, that it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you indicate you're good at handling data, people just give you more of it. And many of the people that we've interviewed have come out and said that same thing. And so I guess if you want to get more involved in this, the key is that early part of the curve to establish a reputation as somebody who can find unique stuff and handle information, pretty professionally. One last point on the My OSINT training is I just did a quick search, and they have a standalone Twitter account here. And so the handle is @MyOSINTTrainer. So you can look them up. If you missed that, you can just look at my account at the accounts I follow. I just followed them. So thanks for that back and forth, guys. Thanks to ID10T for highlighting the resource. I did want to just highlight one or two more resources. So if you look back in the nest, for 5 entries, I have 2 tweets, one titled Resources 1, one titled Resources 2. We spent a little bit longer on this than I had expected, so I'll just go through these at the highest level. Other resources that are linked there include a thread that's discussing the use of AI to search through Earth images. And so, in theory, that's a much faster way that you could be working on geolocation. I haven't actually worked through the tools that are set out in that thread, but I know there are some folks here who do good geolocation work who might be interested in that. There's a note, I think many of us have used the services of the account here on Twitter called @vidtranslator, and they put up a post just the other day noting that their API access to Twitter had finally been cut. I think it's way too much money for them to buy the commercial version that Twitter now wants. And so instead, they're highlighting that you can continue to use their services, but you have to drop the Twitter link into their standalone website. So I'm sure I will make use of that in future. Just wanted to let people know that you can't just at their account in order to get a translation anymore. The last item in this Resources 1, I think it was Jacoby earlier who referred to Cyber Detective. Cyber Detective does great work highlighting tools. I've reached out to that account to come and speak to us, but I think it's an anonymous account, and they're not. They prefer to not speak, but they're more than happy that we promote the tools that they highlight. In this particular case, 2 days ago, they put out a link to their GitHub, which, similar to this giant OSINT training tool that ID10T brought to our attention, Cyber Detective's GitHub also has more than 1,000 tools. So there's just tons to wade through. Jacoby, did you want to go ahead?
2 items. I put the thread from Benjamin Strick that you referenced earlier with a number of tools that he encourages people to check out up in the nest. And then also, I just wanted to comment on the vid translator change. I had to use that earlier today, and so I went to their site and put in the URL, and it works great. If you want to try and use it in your own post, there's a fee associated with that. So it keeps it up, the translated version, up on their site, and if you just want to download it, there's a little bit of a fee there. So if anybody's interested.
Good to know. I don't think I've ever used their translated version in a post. I usually just want to understand what's being said or to confirm a translation, but that's interesting. Okay. Okay. I'll quickly run through the items in resources number 2, which is the 5th item back in the nest. Many of these are just new publications. So the Institute for the Study of War, which of course has made its name by developing the Ukraine, its version of Ukraine frontline maps, has now come out with a China and Taiwan based report. And when we've discussed it over the last 2 or 3 weeks since the most recent exercises, I have been sort of putting out a call for, if you guys know about good resources related to Taiwan, please let me know. 1 or 2 of you have gotten back to me, which is great, but it just seemed like there wasn't a lot that was being done at a more systematic level, and so the ISW's effort is welcome from my perspective. Connected with that, The Economist is also coming out with a new defense-based newsletter. It will only be available to subscribers of The Economist, but I know there are some of those among us, so you might want to look into that. There are 2 resources in this tweet. One is a tutorial that Bellingcat put out just recently. It's the tweet by Eric Toller. It links to a YouTube video they did explaining how you would use the NASA FIRMS satellite to do OSINT work. And others have done explanatory videos on it in the past, but Bellingcat usually does a terrific job. Sort of related to that, there is a tweet in that thread by Sil, S-C-I-L, and it's a thread for OSINT satellite resources. And this came out a week or two ago, but it had gotten very little attention. And I only came across it last night. We were in a space, we were talking about some features of satellite intelligence, and I was searching for some key phrases, and it brought this thread up, and I thought, oh wow, that's a great resource. So I would encourage you to have a look through that. It's got some great points in it. Finally, in this sort of resource section, occasionally I will highlight job opportunities, because I know some listeners are looking for that kind of info. There's been a real explosion in the development of visual investigations teams. I know that the New York Times sort of led the way on that about a year ago, and I think the BBC has done it as well. Now, apparently, the Financial Times is developing their own team, and so they're hiring 3 positions essentially to do OSINT work for them. So if you're in the market for it, you should put your application in. Okay. Again, this took a little bit longer to cover than I had expected. Before moving on, it's now the 3rd item back in the nest. I just want to remind everybody that friends of the space are streaming this conversation to YouTube as well. So, of course, come for the discussion here so that you can participate as a speaker, because you can't do that via YouTube. But if you'd like to listen back to any portion of the conversation, or you miss a space, we are trying to archive our talks over there. So the link is in the nest. Before getting into the broader conversation topics, there was one development in the last couple of days that came as a real surprise. And that was several of the leading mapping accounts came out and mentioned our access to Google Maps has been cut off. And it was some of the leading organizations who came out and said this. And so if you have a look at that first item in the nest, we had tweets. Here, I'll break them out. We had tweets come out from GeoConfirmed saying that their work with UA control maps, that their standalone custom Google map of the front line had been shut down. And instead, they were going to consolidate their efforts on UA control map, which is mainly run by Project Owl, which is another OSINT organization here on Twitter. And then, of course, not even a day later, Project Owl came out and said our map has been taken down as well. And we've inquired as to why, and we haven't gotten a response back. Once that developed, people started to think, well, are they going to take down all the maps? And in anticipation of that, you can still run your own individual custom map. And so, for example, Eric Toller took the approach, I'll put this up in the nest as well, of saying, well, hey, we may as well share our resources. If they can't be consolidated in one that's going to draw attention, we may as well at least be developing our own map files and sharing them. And so he began to share out his .kmz files, which was an interesting approach. And I'm not sure how far down the road that would have gone. It may have made it so that really only the dedicated mappers would have had access to them if the ones that were put up more publicly were constantly being taken down, which would have made the whole OSINT community here on Twitter a little poorer. Now, as far as I know, no one got an answer to why this change was suggested. So just to illustrate that, Elliot Higgins was discussing this, and somebody came back to him and said that they think it's probably because Ukraine is beginning some operations to prepare for its offensive, and that someone, unnamed, whether Ukrainian or American, might have reached out to Google to say, hey, we can't be having some of these frontline maps be updating all the time. It's an operational risk. And his response was, okay, well, I appreciate that. However, if that's what the cause is, Google should tell us that, just so we know what the rules are, what the parameters are. And I think that's a totally fair point. Before getting a response from Google about why they were taking them down, I'll put this last one up. In fact, GeoConfirmed came back on Twitter and said, actually, the UA control map, which is the one run by Project Owl, is now back online, and that no reason was given for it to be taken down. No reason was given for why it came back up. And so we're sort of in a state of limbo. It looks like good news at this point, but given the uncertainty, there's still a possibility that the maps might come down again. And I suspect that these groups are going to continue to try to reach out to Google just to clarify what the rules are. And hopefully will, if they find out, hopefully they'll pass it along to others, because there are several among us who have used custom Google Maps. Being sort of censored in that way, it may be understandable, but knowing when and why you can't publish information there will be important. We'll go to Jacoby and then Aaron.
This just goes back to the question I was going to ask ID10T a little bit earlier about the engagement in a tool of Google or Chrome, and how that consideration, how one considers using a tool that relies on Google, who, especially right now, is engaged in making materials available or not. And I just wondered what ID10T might think about that, because as I understand it, the tools he was talking about rely on a Chrome extension, I think, right?
That's correct. So all the way down that rabbit hole on why the search engine for the star.me pages, we started with the search engine, did a search for toolbox. I found a journalist toolbox page from a start.me page. And on the journalist toolbox page, I then found an extension for Chrome, and that was the Treeverse. So down at the bottom of this rabbit hole, yeah, it's a Google extension, and tomorrow it might be gone. If Google decides that this is no longer applicable to our terms and conditions, we don't like it, smells funny, we're going to get rid of it. Same thing with apps. So now I have not had too much of a problem in the past. I love my Chrome. I also have Firefox. I also have Opera. I use them for different things. But for the most part, when I have an extension that I like, I use it, and then I have had a couple of them disappear on me on an update. Oh, well, okay, bummer. And then I have to find a different tool. Thank you, Google, because there was a reason why they've gotten rid of it. Now, I say that and might raise your eyebrows, but Google does pretty good at maintaining their liability. They don't want to put something out malicious that causes a bad user experience. That's why I say thank you, Google. There might have been something in there that could affect me negatively. I understand from the perspective of OSINT, I want a tool and I want it there and I want it there tomorrow, and don't mess with my tool. But we use what we have at hand. There are, going back up the rabbit hole, back up to the search, there are plenty of others. There are plenty of other ways, and again, I'll reiterate, 90,000 pages, with each page having hundreds of different links, and each one of those links having tools or links to a page of many tools, i.e. the journalist toolbox was one of those pages that was a page of tools. So using the search function as a tool to find other tools, and wherever those tools may be, user discretion is advised.
Aaron, did you want to go ahead?
Hey guys, how you doing? Michael and everybody, good. Yeah, sorry I couldn't do the Balmer report last night. Got pretty busy. Balmer report is back on Sunday night at 2200 Eastern. What I was going to talk about is it's concerning what I've been hearing too about these maps. It's very concerning that what happens. We're only seeing the updates after an offensive or some movement has begun. It's been analyzed, such as ISW. I wonder if it's going to affect ISW. I really hope it doesn't, but that's one thing I absolutely understand as far as Reznikov and the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense as well. I understand completely their concerns about those aspects of maps being updated. And I wonder if, the ISW is among them that they're concerned about. I mean, there's the other map makers, right? Simtac. There's, of course, Jomanai of the West. And then there's Ukraine War Mappers, which we all know. Some of us know in here. He's a good guy, good crew. And so these mappers have been very important to the OSINT community. And all of us, and Ukraine War Maps come up. He's been here. He's been in MySpace, the Balmer report, and those who don't know me, I'm a military analyst, historian, host the Balmer report. Anyway, I wanted to come up because I am concerned about their thoughts of this as well. Like I'm worried about, okay, we're only publishing what is open source, but can they clearly define what is public and what is still under OPSEC, operational security?
Right. And so, but just to be clear, it is not yet known if the reason that those two maps were taken down is for OPSEC reasons. I mentioned the comment that Elliot Higgins put up where he was responding to speculation. That was the reason. But we don't know. It may be a policy change. It may be that they're taking them down more out of general concern about the potential for disinformation spread, as opposed to Ukrainian OPSEC. It could be that they were manually reported or mass reported, and they came down until a human reviewer could look at them. The point is that if it had only been one, then you would assume it's isolated incident. Given that it was several of the biggest, then you start to be concerned it may be a policy change, and it's just not clear. So the upshot is they're coming back online now, and now it's just hoping to clarify what the policy is.
Yeah, and I do hope that they do clarify that, because I mean, if you're going to, none of us want to be kept in the wind as far as kind of feeling like it's kind of just there's not enough data out there, and we can't get a clue of where they are coming from on this. And I think we will hear pretty soon. There's air raid sirens in Dnipro. Apparently there was an explosion in Dnipro, and then air defense active over Kyiv. Just wanted to throw that in there, if that's okay.
Okay, thanks, Aaron. And further to Aaron's point, I'm not sure, others may know, does the Institute for the Study of War rely on Google Maps in preparing its content, or does it have its own proprietary? I would assume an organization that big might prefer not to rely on an outside mapping org, so that they may not be affected at all. But if anybody knows, you can let me know. But otherwise, I will move on. The first background subject I wanted to bring up for broader discussion, we'll see how much conversation it generates. It may be more of a sort of a background teaching session, and that is that
Hey, Michael, you're having a little technical difficulties with your mic there.
Sorry about that. If my mic's a little off, I'll go to Kobe and I'll fix it.
Your mic is a little hot.
Yeah, he said he would go to you, so I guess we're in charge for the time being, and I'm going to throw a coup on you, Jacoby.
You go.
I'm just kidding.
I'm gonna mute me. Oh wait, I don't have any
No.
Y'all have the mute button.
All right. So yes, I will respectfully use my power abusively. But the
Oh baby.
yeah, we're gonna probably transition here from.
Oh, I'll hijack the space in a second if you want me to.
I am so fast at fixing the mic. It takes like 20 seconds. I could tell the revolution was coming, so I'm fast. Yeah, so I wanted to move on to the issue of political prisoners, and I will load the nest on that basis. While I'm doing this for just a moment, you can have a look at the second item in the nest now is just the Ukrainian frontline update, and so there are a couple of interesting points in there, including the deep state map that was retweeted by Rob Lee of control around Bakhmut. And Rob Lee is a particularly sophisticated guy. And so if he is relying on that particular map, I think it's fairly good. Unfortunately, that seems to be one of the maps that suggests the most Russian control at this point. So it looks like they are continuing to make slow progress through Bakhmut. Okay, so setting the stage for a conversation about political prisoners in Russia is just to set up the context, and we don't want to miss, the forest for the trees. So if you have a look at the nest, there have been a couple of data points released in the last week or so that I hadn't seen come out in quite a while. And so this first one was a Ukrainian official who is the Commissioner for Missing Persons, came out and said that there are currently 7,000 Ukrainian soldiers who are considered missing. And it's believed that about 2/3 of those will likely turn out to be in captivity. And so the reason I'm setting out this context is to say, political repression, manipulation of the Russian justice system is important, but that its scope needs to be set against the fact that there are all sorts of prisoners, including prisoners of war, and not forgetting about them is important. So I thought I would just lay out some of these prisoner of war points before getting into a discussion of the Russian political prisoners. So there are apparently 7,000 missing soldiers, of which 2/3 are believed to be in captivity. The second point, just the other day, Zelensky said that 2,235 prisoners of war have been returned. And so, if you combine those numbers, it suggests that there may be between 5,000 and 6,000 prisoners of war currently, and that 2,200 have been returned so far. So that would, imply something like 1/4 of all those taken prisoner have been exchanged to this point. And then I guess the third point was Zelensky came out and repeated the number, and it was just ever so slightly higher because they released a further 44 people in just the last few days. I had also heard that I believe it was the head of Ukrainian intelligence, Budanov, came out the other day and made a comment about the fact that they were attempting to work on an all-for-all prisoner exchange with Russia. But I've heard talk about that on and off for several times over the last few months. And so, while I remain hopeful, it strikes me that it's probably unlikely that a mass exchange of prisoners will take place anytime soon. So that's the context to keep in mind. And just before digging into the Russian issue, I'll also point out that, of course, there are political prisoners. This presentation is not to ignore the fact that there are political prisoners in Belarus, and there are political prisoners in Georgia, and in many places in the region whose matters should not be forgot either. So the first item up in the nest now, it's an article by Medusa, and it's an interview with a criminal lawyer, and three different criminal lawyers, and they give an overview of the ways in which the Russian justice system has been changing. And in particular, Russia has been tightening its laws on repression. And so there are lots of things that are happening more on the civil side, limiting promotion of LGBT lifestyles and childless lifestyles. They have expanded massively the lists of foreign agents. They've changed the definition of foreign agent to make it extremely broad, so that it includes essentially anybody who may potentially, it doesn't require the transfer of funds. It's anybody who may essentially be in touch with foreigners and who are against the war. They've required that various writings in bookstores, while the books can still be sold, they can't be advertised. And so even if they sit on shelves, they're often arranged in a way so they're wrapped in brown paper, and they have to have labels on them saying that this material has been prepared by a person who's been identified as a foreign agent. So we really are seeing moves back toward the way things were during the Soviet Union. Before I continue, Random, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on that topic because it's been a grinding process, and it's obviously it's not just our focus is more on Russia because the fact that they are going further back. Other countries have been having issues in regards to China. Just to point this out, they've been arresting foreign businessmen recently, and that has picked up. The United States recently sanctioned the FSB and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard members, certain select people within those organizations because of political prisoners. Everybody knows about Evan Gerasevich, the reporter for the Wall Street Journal, but also included in the way that the Russians have really been pushing the foreign agent line is they've been forcing the big opposition media on Russia has mainly migrated to YouTube since most major broadcasters have pretty much been pushed out of the way. And the thing they force people who do online journalism in Russia is to put up these big banners like in their videos or on their sites that state that I am a foreign agent of so-and-so against the Russian Federation and all that. So that was before this. And with these latest law changes, in addition to the digital conscription laws, they've also pretty much censored the whole thing. So even after all these other censorships and changes they made to their foreign agent laws, it's pretty much come down to the fact that if you just say one thing wrong, you're going to be tried as a foreign agent in Russia.
That's a great summary. We're going to break some of that down as we go ahead. So feel free to jump back in on specific points. So running through the items in the nest, just to get a little bit more specific, beyond these general repressions that we were just referring to, the Russian government has been pursuing criminal charges increasingly aggressively. And so while trumped-up criminal charges have been used in Russia since, of course, before the full-scale invasion in February 2022. Navalny, for example, was convicted on apparently thinly evidenced fraud allegations to a period of, I believe it was only initially 2 or 3 years that he was convicted, and that the use of the criminal system for opponents of the regime was generally restricted to charges that might be, a few days or months of imprisonment, and the idea was more to make them politically illegitimate than to imprison them at length. However, looking at the second item in the nest, this is an article from the Wall Street Journal, and in it they note that between the years of 1998 and 2018, so 20 years, only 100 people were convicted in Russia on the charge of treason, which is only about 5 a year. In the last month alone, 10 different espionage cases were launched. So it's now running at something like 5 times the rate it had previously. And in just a moment, we'll hear that I think it was just yesterday, they launched 3 more treason investigations. So they're increasingly using some of the most harsh charges against their opponents. In addition to that, they've recently changed the penalty for treason. I believe it was previously either 20 or 25 years, but now it's been changed to include life as a sentence. Aaron, did you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that we're also looking at the Russians authorities, according to ISW as well, have started sending military registration summonses that include threats of restrictive measures. So we're also seeing, anybody that criticizes the armed forces at all is could be potentially facing criminal charges. So this is what I mean by how desperate they're getting. They're getting, there's so if they don't allow their son to get conscripted, there's threats to their family. We don't know exactly what this could entail, but this is certainly something where we're seeing the real oppressive nature going back in history. We're seeing that being relived with forced conscription and forced members being put back into, they're obviously looking for veterans, but they're also looking for any able body. I mean, it's getting bad for the Russians, and they are really trying to squeeze whatever's in that bottle, if you know what I mean, like trying to squeeze of an empty bottle, trying to squeeze whatever they can get out of it, right?
So that is a fair point, that use of criminal charges in the conscription context seems like it's becoming increasingly harsh as well. I know that early on, there were many people who refused to serve when their time for conscription came up, and they, used various means to object to it, and in many cases they were fined and so on. I am hearing increasing reports that people refusing to participate when called up are facing jail time on the scale of years. But further, so focused on those who are publicly political opponents of the regime, as opposed to your day-to-day conscripted personnel. Looking at the fourth item in the nest, it's an article by Medusa. The Russian Duma, the legislature there, also just recently adopted an amendment that allows them to strip naturalized citizens of citizenship if you do anything that poses a threat to Russian national security. And obviously, it's not a huge population of people who can lose dual nationality, but it is increasing. It is increasing severity of criminal penalty. I'm getting DMs in the background. But anyway, thanks to everybody who's joined us. If you have to drop, that's no problem. Thank you very much. The fifth item up in the nest is sort of a little bit of a ray of hope, in that these latest legal changes, both to increase the penalties for treason and having the ability to strip dual nationality. A group of Russian lawyers have now applied to Russia's highest court in an attempt to have those laws declared unconstitutional. And obviously this is a brave attempt. I don't think there is a lot of hope that this challenge will succeed, but it is great to see that there are people in Russia who are still attempting to, fight for civil rights there and the process of law. So part of the reason that inspired us to even look at this subject in a little bit more depth and think it was worth bringing forward to the space was there were some developments in the last week or so. In particular, so I'm going to take a moment in the next sort of section or two of material to highlight some specific political prisoners. And the one person who came to our attention about a week ago was Vladimir Kara-Murza, because he was convicted of I'm not sure if it was treason charges or whether it was discrediting the Russian military.
It was treason.
It was treason.
Yeah, they got him on the 25-year treason charge when they sentenced him. Obviously, we were just talking about they just passed the Duma law where they're extending that to life sentences. But yeah, they sentenced him to 25 years with the law before the passage by the Duma.
And so for those who aren't familiar with Kara-Murza, I believe he had worked closely with Nemtsov before Nemtsov was assassinated in 2014. And while others stayed based entirely in Russia, like Navalny, Kara-Murza came over to the United States and was living abroad a little bit more regularly. But he had been a political organizer in Russia, opposed to Putin's party. And when the full-scale invasion broke out, he felt it was his duty to go back to voice his opposition to the invasion in person in Russia. And people told him that, of course, he would be arrested, and he understood those risks. And he was initially arrested and I believe convicted on some minor charge where they were only going to hold him for a few months, but that was really just to give them time to, develop the basis for a greater show trial. And that's the conviction that came to pass just about a week ago. And I believe that treason charge was based on comments that he made in public speeches he gave, for the most part, in the United States. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about him, there are some items in the nest, including his final speech that he read out in court. And that's in the Moscow Times article that's in the nest. And then there's also a profile of him and some of his writing that was put together by the Washington Post, which is the second item in the nest.
Yeah, just to put a finer point on that, Kara-Murza has been around for a long time because he was Nemtsov's protege. So the famous opposition leader Boris Nemtsov, who was very critical of Putin, obviously was gunned down in the streets of Moscow, led to basically Kara-Murza taking over for the party. He survived a couple poisoning attempts, had to leave the country, came back, and then they charged him with criticizing the military and the various aspects of Russia, and then they added on treason for some of his comments. And so it's like 18 years and 7 years combined. So they went from max sentence to 25.
Jacoby, did you want to go ahead?
Random kind of beat me to it. I was just going to mention that he believes that he was also heavily targeted for his support of the Magnitsky Act. And like Random was saying, he, the latest charge that they have him sentenced for is really just the cap on years and years of criticism of the government on his part, and his opposition to Putin for years and years. So he compared him to Benito Mussolini, among many other things.
And so sometimes when we run through these things, these are items that I've been reading about, of course, for years. If you have any questions as we name names, feel free to come up and ask. The next 2 points go a little bit more to that background. So we've mentioned Nemtsov, who was the leading political opponent who was assassinated in 2014. That after, and then Jacoby also made reference to the fact that Vladimir Kara-Murza, who was just convicted, had worked abroad for the passage in, the United States and the United Kingdom and other countries of Magnitsky laws. And that relates to another opponent of the regime. Now, what happened was there was financial corruption, economic corruption that was going on 15 years ago. And in particular, there was one.
Your mic is out again. Just 1 second. And
was he trying to explain where the Magnitsky Act came from?
I believe so. Yes.
Okay, so Sergei Magnitsky was a tax lawyer. He was also great friends with a man by the name of Bill Browder, who advocated for what we now know as the Magnitsky Act. Sergei Magnitsky was found murdered because he was trying to do the financial, basically go after the financials of Russian oligarchs and other people who were basically abusing their privileges. And as a result, the act passed the House in 2012. The House and the Senate in 2012 was signed into law, and then was further added on to in 2017, 2018, or 2016, 2017 with the Global Magnitsky Act, which is the fun law that allows the United States to go and seize all the assets of Russian oligarchs because you're a Russian oligarch and you're doing a lot of bad things. So that's where the Magnitsky Act comes into play. And that's how it's been used in the war in Ukraine to target allies, seize some yachts, all the fun stuff that the DOJ has and other groups have been trying to do in order to get seize the accounts and the finances of the people who are either allied with Putin or have supported Putin that have gotten rich off it. So that's the gist of it. Hopefully I bought enough time for Mike's.
You did.
Michael Bond.
You did. Yeah, so apologies. I run this space using an emulator, so I can do it on a PC, and occasionally my mic develops an error that I just have to reset. So Random did an admirable job. I'll add to the points that in investigating corruption, when Magnitsky was killed for pursuing that investigation, he very specifically was the lawyer of a Western investor named Bill Browder, who had started as a private equity fund that was doing very well. But many of Browder's investments were being considerably whittled away by oligarchs who, using various forms of corruption, were essentially stealing assets of businesses that Browder had invested in. Magnitsky was investigating that for him. His investigation led him to be killed. Browder took this extremely personally because Magnitsky had been a friend of his, and he dedicated a lot of his life in the last 15 years to pressing for laws that would sanction anybody involved in essentially repressing people, extrajudicially, including murder, as happened to his friend Magnitsky. Vladimir Kara-Murza was among those opponents of the regime who thought Magnitsky rules would be very helpful in pressuring the Kremlin and push for their passage. now that Kara-Murza has gone back, he has now been convicted on these charges that are trumped up, and he's in a bad spot. But as are many political prisoners there. And so, with that background, the third item in the nest just is an ironic note, which is that really the faces of corruption in Russia don't appear to change very much, and that in fact, the same judge who just convicted Kara-Murza about a week ago was the same man who 25 years ago, as judge, approved the pre-trial detention of Magnitsky himself. So that's a bit of an irony. And if you'd like to hear a little bit more about, the opinion on the prospects of Kara-Murza and his character, the fourth item back in the nest is an interview that the Times did with Bill Browder following the conviction. And so that will give you a little bit more insight there. And I'm just making sure. Yep. So I've covered those points. I'll just put one or two more items in the nest, if you will bear with me a moment. And just a reminder that Browder, of course, writing about what happened to his friend Magnitsky and his effort to unravel the corruption in Russia, has written two books, the first being Red Notice, and the more recent book being Freezing Order, both of which have been, bestsellers in the last year. Other than Kara-Murza, there are several other high-profile political prisoners in Russia at the moment. Of course, one is Navalny, who had stayed on in Russia as the sort of primary political opposition to Putin's party, and whose aspects of his life were made into the recent documentary that won the Oscar. And so he was initially convicted prior to the invasion on trumped up allegations of fraud. Since then, he had a second conviction passed against him that resulted in a further 9 years being added to his sentence. And now some of these articles that are in the nest, if you have a look, he is facing a further life sentence. And it's believed that a terrorism case is going to be opened against him. There's an article on that. It's the second in the nest. And that will add potentially 30 more years to his sentence, which at his age would essentially be the rest of his life.
In addition to Navalny, one of his, political allies was a man by the name of Yevgeny Roizman, who was the former mayor of the town of Yekaterinburg, was also arrested this week for making statements against the Russian military. And so there have been protests and people being arrested for that as well.
Absolutely. And so now with Navalny facing a third set of charges that would result in, imprisonment for the rest of his remaining life, they're playing all kinds of tricks apparently with him. It's reported that the evidence against him, he's been given 10 days to become familiar with it. They're not allowing him to use pencil and paper to make any notes to prepare for his defense. They limit his time with his lawyer. And apparently the evidence against him runs to some absurd, I think it was something like 190 volumes of alleged evidence. And so, in terms of procedural justice, it's pretty clear that it is a show trial. Jacoby, go ahead.
Just because I happened to notice it was 196 volumes, to put a fine point on it.
Yeah, I mean, if he got to the 190 and it was the last 6 that got him, then, kudos to him, but I suspect
I think they won't give him 200 because you get a free thing of like a Napoleon in the Russian prison. I don't know. That is a bad joke on my part, but it's just I could go either way with that. But the fact is that they really are piling on at this point.
Okay, so I'm going to add a few more items to the nest, and this is just to highlight the fact that while the stories of Kara-Murza and of Navalny, they have lots of advocates backing them. So Browder is pressing extremely hard for action to free Kara-Murza, and others, like Bellingcat was involved in the production of the Navalny documentary that won the Oscar. So they have lots of attention being shined on their cases, but that there are many, many other political prisoners in Russia. And I won't go into detail on all of these points, but I've put a few of them up in the nest, just so that they're not forgotten, and so that if it's something you're interested in, you can dig into it a little bit further. And so another prominent politician, they were sort of regarded as a group of three, being Navalny, Kara-Murza, and this gentleman, Ilya Yashin. And he has been convicted. I believe he was only convicted to be held for a period of some months, but given the way that the pattern of Russia convicting someone just to hold them in order to prepare a trial for a lengthier sentence, now that they've convicted Kara-Murza and they're moving on to Navalny, I wouldn't be surprised if Yashin, being one of the remaining high-profile individuals, would be next in line for that treatment. Jacoby, go ahead.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this earlier when you were speaking of Evan Gershkovich, but it came out earlier this week. I think I saw it in the New York Times, that Lavrov, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister for Russia, while he was in New York at the UN during the meetings that Russia was holding at the Security Council for the month that they have the leadership in the Security Council, he was quoted as suggesting or hinting at the possibility that there could be a prisoner swap involving Americans detained in Russia, arguably political prisoners, Paul Whelan and Evan Gershkovich for prisoners being held either in, I think they were actually in exchange for for Russian POWs, but I'm not exactly sure, but it was just hinted at. But just the idea that these prisoners, whether they be Russian in origin or foreigners, that they're being used as pawns as well, or suggested to be being used as pawns.
I've heard similar reports, and in just a moment I wanted to get into the U.S. citizens who have been held. So I do have a couple of sources to back up your points there. And as I bring up those details, feel free to jump back in. So just running through the items in the nest, in addition to Yashin, there are other good profiles of political prisoners. And again, I won't go into detail on them, but the second item in the nest is a profile of Andrei Pivovarov, who is an opposition politician in Russia. In a notable case, third item in the nest, there was a recent conviction. It was only 3 days ago, where a person who was employed with a police department in Moscow was sentenced to 7 years in jail for spreading fakes about the Russian army. And this one is notable. Increasingly, conviction on this basis is common. This one was notable because the spreading of fakes were comments that he made in private telephone calls that were tapped and intercepted. And so he wasn't going out in public and saying these things. He was saying them in private phone calls to associates. And but government investigators heard them, pressed charges, and now he's going to jail for 7 years. They're also increasingly going after, sort of smaller and smaller fish. So the fourth item in the nest, just today, charges have been pressed against a military blogger who has been critical of the invasion. And again, while early in the war there was opposition where people who were saying things online critical of the war were receiving fines or imprisonment of a few days or a week, it looks like when they're bringing these charges now, they're pursuing them at the level of years. The fifth item back in the nest is an article by Medusa. And earlier I referred to the fact that instead of pursuing 5 treason cases per year, the Russians had filed 10 in the last month. That didn't include these items. So this article by Medusa notes that the FSB submitted 3 treason charges just yesterday. And apparently at this point they're anonymous, so it's not even clear who they're against, whether they are against people already in custody, potentially some of those higher profile people I mentioned a moment ago, or whether they're charges against new unfortunate people. So moving on to the political prisoners who are U.S. citizens, I'm just going to add 2 or 3 items to the nest. And this really goes to what Jacoby was speaking about. So, of course, the most profile at the moment is Evan Gershkovich, who is a journalist for the Wall Street Journal. And the Wall Street Journal, to its credit, has been extremely active in keeping his name in the news. And there's been a great outpouring of support for him in the journalism community. Just this week, 300 foreign journalists signed a letter to the Kremlin expressing the fact that journalism is not espionage, and that journalism is critical to the conduct of a state fairly, and so they're doing a great job of building a coalition of allies. However, it's not clear that's going to sway the Russians. It seems like these moves are very calculated. And so I wanted to highlight a few details that I haven't seen a lot of coverage of, may have gone overlooked. The first item is the fact that the gentleman by the name of Vadim Prokhorov, who was a defense attorney who represented Vladimir Kara-Murza, after the trial concluded and Kara-Murza was convicted, his lawyer had to leave the country. He was being threatened with disbarment so that he wouldn't be allowed to practice law anymore. And there was also talk about him being prosecuted for the actions he carried out as a defense lawyer. So I'm a lawyer myself. That's wild to me. You can't have a functioning justice system under those sorts of conditions. The second item in the nest, apparently a public relations expert went to meet with Evan Gershkovich after he was detained, presumably in an effort to help build support for his cause. And then that public relations expert was detained by the police. And so this idea of you can't seek legal counsel, if you have advisors come to you, they will be, punished as well, essentially means, there is essentially no support for those who are being targeted. Unfortunately, to the extent that these U.S. citizens who are detained are essentially being treated like pawns, The third item in the nest is an interview with the family of Paul Whelan, who I believe is a former Marine who has been in custody in Russia for some years now. And his family is noting that as Russia takes additional U.S. citizens as detainees, it just makes it less and less likely that Whelan himself, individually will be returned to the United States, because it seems like it's just becoming a game of let's take as many pawns as we can so that when we execute a trade, we'll get the best possible trade. And that if people who are higher profile, it's bizarre to say it, but if you are a detainee in Russia and somebody who is more high profile than you has also been detained, unfortunately, your odds of being swapped may go down because, you'll kind of be bumped out of priority in terms of trade. To that end, the fourth item in the nest, it's the tweet by Francis Scar. He notes that Maria Simonyan, who is a high-profile, Russian propagandist, she came out and made a statement that essentially was very clear that they're taking these people expressly for trade. And she basically said, if you give us Julian Assange, we'll give you Whelan, Kara-Murza, and Evan Gershkovich. Now, of course, she doesn't speak with any authority for the state, but it just shows the sentiment, and that, number one, they'll joke about it, and number two, I think the joking is only, half joking, and that is expressly the purpose. Jacoby, go ahead.
This reminds me of not that long ago when the Russians were detaining Brittany Griner, the women's WNBA player who was detained early. I think it was even just a couple days before Russia invaded Ukraine, and held for months and months. And she, to your point about hierarchy of foreigners being detained, I think Paul Whelan had been detained for much longer, and there was some reporting about, I think, from Paul Whelan's family members or people speaking out in support of him, that they were disappointed to see that he was not included in a prisoner swap that Brittany Griner was part of, and it sort of was a leapfrogging over Paul Whelan at the time, which speaks to your point.
Which is a hot button political issue. I know that there were a lot of hot takes at the time. I don't know that we need to debate, the specific value of who to trade for. The U.S. Officials, as far as I heard them say, was that the exchange that occurred was the only exchange that was on the table from the Russian side, and that it wasn't really a choice of choosing, or it wasn't a matter of having a choice. In any event, we'll go to Random and then to Artemis. Go ahead, Random.
Okay, so yeah, just to touch on a couple of points when it comes to, I know Griner gave an interview today where she talked about her experiences and how she's pretty much said she's not going out of the country to play again after her experiences in Russia. She also talked about, when asked about Evan and Paul Whelan, the other thing was that today the Russians, in a tit for tat with both the sanctions and on the FSB and the other issues going on in the whole visa spout with Lavrov, they denied a consular visit by the State Department to see Gershkovich today. And the other thing that I always find ironic is when it comes to Margarita Simonyan, the head of Russia Today, the propagandist that we're talking about, she's always on propaganda television. She is always one of the front people 24/7. Her husband is another one of these people. that are up in the class of Russian propagandists, along with Vladimir Solovyov. So they'll always come out and make statements that get the most headway. When it comes to foreign agents and this game that the Russians play, they definitely love to have like this trolling attitude about it. Not just who they pick, why they pick, and who they try and get back as a prisoner swap. As a mainline example, one of the headliners this past weekend doing an expose on Elon Musk was Marina Butina, the former spy who was involved in infiltrating the NRA back in 2016.
Yeah, as we get into developments in Ukraine in maybe 15 or 20 minutes, there's been a lot of developments on the espionage front, and it seems like there are a good half dozen Russian agents who are facing arrest in various Western countries. And so I've seen an analysis where people are suggesting that the arrest of Gershkovich came after some of these other arrests, and so they already may have exchanged targets in mind. Although, of the half dozen, it's not clear who they would set as their priority. Grammer, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you're right on the that, and his family actually noted that they were disappointed, of course, and they were heartbroken that he wasn't going to be included. But they also, I was pretty touched by the fact that they were very gracious towards Brittany Griner herself. They weren't, they weren't resentful towards her, or they weren't getting into any of the political side of it at all. They realized that it seemed like they knew and believed that the Biden administration did everything they could to try and get him home. But just Russia was refusing to budge.
Yeah, then it's, of course, a touch of grace goes a long way in situations like this. And hopefully Mr. Wellen will be released soon. Austin, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Michael. Nice to see some familiar faces here. It's been a while, Grammer. It's great to hear your voice again. What was previously described as sort of tit for tat arrests going on in Russia is exactly that. In regards to the previous prisoner swaps that we've seen with Griner and everything. The reality of the situation, as much as political media would like you to not believe, is that you have to take the offer on the table, or you just don't take the offer at all. And your options are, get an American out or get nobody out, and everyone still sits there. And the current political climate in the U.S. is very much a damned if you do, damned if you don't from the opposition, no matter who it is. So I think the Biden administration was actually quite apt in executing that swap. And, obviously Griner's response has been as accurate as I would have imagined it to be. Look, if I was held in a Russian cell for a couple of months, I don't think I'd ever want to leave the U.S. again either. But it also makes sense for Paul Whelan's family to understand that too. And I think we've seen a lot more grace and a lot more patience exhibited by, the folks actually experiencing this, as opposed to, those running with a narrative. That being said, so the State Department recently updated their do not travel notice for Russia. So they initially released this do not travel, I want to say, I think it was like 2 or 3 days after the invasion. Before that, it was reconsidered travel. But after, Griner was arrested, and also there's a lot of rumors swirling around about foreign nationals potentially facing like conscription notices, especially if they were dual nationals. They updated that, and they've updated it again to sort of just say that, U.S. nationals in particular and Western nationals in general are being targeted by sort of the Russian security apparatus. And as Michael pointed out quite aptly, something to look at here as an indicator beyond those warnings is the fact that consular services aren't being provided to the reporter who's currently facing his show trial there. And I think show trial is an accurate term, because when we're looking at these sort of prosecutions and these detainments, it tends to all drum under the term of national security. But when you actually look at what's going on and what the prosecutors are bringing to the table, it's very clear that The Russian Federation is simply attempting to grab as many high-profile people as possible that are still within the country to use as, was said earlier, pawns for these sort of prisoner swaps. It's to them, it's capital. And in regards to the U.S. response and also how Russian media is portraying this, these are my two final points here. Number one, absolutely, the U.S. is cracking down on Russian agents operating within the United States. And typically, I would say for the last 50 years, and random, feel free to disagree with me if you do, the gentleman's game of the Cold War has kind of gone on in a different sort of way. We have our spies in Russia, they have their spies here, and we generally know who they are, and we will nab them when we want to, and they'll nab ours when we want to, and then we exchange them. But as a result of sort of the Russians going after reporters, going after basketball players, I think we're seeing a turn towards, I would call it escalation on an espionage front, in that we are starting to grab or go after some of these agents that we know exist, who aren't like the Maria Butinas, who are like actively trying to infiltrate domestic political institutions. And I think the Biden IC is kind of waking up to this idea that we may have to play sort of hostage diplomacy with the remaining Americans in Russia. So that's what it seems like it's going towards there. And yes, of course, Russian media is very antagonistic. And I think we've seen some similar notions on agitprop in general, whether it's coming from the Ukrainians or the Russians. They know how to push, Russia knows how to push the West's political buttons, and the Ukrainians know how to push the Russians' political buttons. And so I don't expect that trend to change anytime soon. So as long as, there are American reporters being held by Russian security services, we're going to continue to see those stories come up on Russian domestic media talking about like, oh, we caught another spy and everything like that, when it's nowhere near the truth.
To my mind, though, this arrest and taking of U.S. citizens as detainees, it's of a piece with just a deteriorating relationship. So the United States and Russia can be opposed over Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But having all of these other aspects of the relationship fall apart as well. So the suspension of most of the elements of the START treaties, talk about Russia withdrawing from various other, I think it was the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. I think that came up just the other day. These detainees, the aggressive uncovering of Russian agents in the West, that it's just, I think it was the American ambassador to Russia came out today. I think it was an article in Commerçant. I don't have it handy, but she came out and said that it seems like the American-Russian relationship is in the worst state that it's been sort of in the memory of the current members of the American government. And I that certainly seems like it's true to me. We'll go to Random and then back to Austin. Go ahead, Random.
No, yeah, the ambassador of Russia did speak to Commerçant. I was just trying to look for it real quick. But yeah, just to go off Austin's point, there is sort of the gentleman's game of spycraft, where you take a spy and send him across the bridge in East Germany for Francis Gary Powers to get back. But now there's that board game, and especially when it comes to other countries, is essentially changing. And it's going more to I'm not going to say North Korea-esque situation, where every foreigner is a target of a bounty of some kind. But the situation is at such where if you're any other news organization, you're going to have to, after what the Russians making a symbol, quote unquote, out of Garosevich Gerakovich is going to be a very troubling situation. So everybody in their newsroom has to wonder if they have to keep their Moscow bureaus open or if they're going to close shop. And the dual nationals, dual citizen question when it comes to Americans is going to be different as opposed to Central Asian communities, and we can go into that topic another time. But just to get back on what Austin was saying, was that the State Department did raise the situation to level 4 at the end of March, which means it's the highest setting. It was like, do not go here. So as it stands now, anybody probably in the West that has some sort of Western connection in Russia, whether it be Western citizenship, is probably going to be a target in some respects to the FSB. And that's going to be whether it be the Swedes raiding and swapping up spies, whether it be the continued look at the European side of the spycraft or spy situation. The American-Russian situation is such that it's getting tense, and it kind of gets overshadowed by the fact that we're still starting to prosecute the Chinese having domestic police stations in New York City. So to the just general fact of the matter is that this espionage tradecraft thing, especially after the whole situation with the leaks, and you have the Russians basically joking on Telegram that the Americans know things before Putin does, is going to have a lot of stuff play out, and we're going to see it play out over the coming months.
Your point about the Chinese police stations is interesting, because that's in the other topic that we prepared for today that it's obvious now that we won't have time for. So we'll have to get that to that.
China is the topic of China is always the Matt Damon of the OSINT space. We've made this perfectly clear. Apologies to China and the OSINT community. We run out of time. Apologies to Matt Damon. If you're like, it's always the same, but we've come to expect that. So we go to Austin.
Yeah. We should go ahead, please.
No worries. No, I actually wanted to expand on Random's point there, and I wanted to kind of drill down on my prior point as well. In regards to the gentleman's game, I think what we're seeing an escalation in that, whereas, in the gentleman's game, you get your spies, I get my spies, and then we exchange them over the bridge, right? What we're looking at now is that Westerners with status are being targeted just because they, for political pawnmanship. And I would agree with you that it's not quite North Korea, because, the last time we had sort of I'd call it more of a hostage negotiation, to be honest. Like, Otto Warmbier was just a college student. Like, he's not somebody, he had status because, he's an American who was being held in North Korea until he sadly perished. But when it comes to Russia, from what we've seen so far, has been all people who have already had some sort of fame. And the Russians know that sort of American news networks and obviously Russian news networks will run that story of their sort of detainment. So, like, if I myself am in Russia, will I face intense scrutiny? Absolutely. Are they going to nab me off the street for no reason and use me for a negotiation? Probably not. People are going to be like, who the fuck is Austin? That being said, I forget how to pronounce his name, like Gershakovich. Like, this is a high-level reporter. And I would also agree that plenty of news bureaus operating out of Moscow are currently weighing their options on how to get their people out of there, because this is the first domino to fall, in my opinion. But that being said, there's a reason state raised their levels in March, and there's a reason they put out a special addendum about, Westerners in general and Americans in particular sort of getting targeted by state security apparatuses. And so, look, if I was running the travel security program for the New York Times, I would be pulling everybody out of Moscow as quickly as possible, because I think what we're looking at right now is that the Russians are willing to pick up people with status from the West and use them in negotiations to get some of their own people back.
Well, to that end, if I'm not mistaken, I think the New York Times did come out and say they were pulling all of their reporters. As have most of the major U.S. media outlets, and so Random referred to the chilling effect, but it's worth reiterating that also contributes to the breakdown in understanding. If you just have less Americans who are trying to understand what's happening in Russia in more detail, it creates greater potential for misunderstanding to develop.
It does. You reminded me of my second point there, if you don't mind me making it real quick. So you previously said that this is, for most of the policymakers within the United States, this is the coldest that relations have been with Russia since many of them came to office. I would say it's probably the coldest it's been since the 80s, like the good old Able Archer days, Reagan, Gorbachev, all that fun stuff. because I think you're absolutely right in regards to seeing a lot of these strategic arms limitation treaties, and I'm not just talking about SALT, sort of meeting their end. Whether it's New START, whether it's the intermediate range ballistic missile treaties, whether I think the ABM treaty is also included on there, if I'm correct. But no, it's absolutely that. We've seen a total sort of departure from all the strategic arms agreements that have taken decades to build. It's funny, whenever I see another update about this, I remember the image of Secretary of State Clinton with the Great Reset button with Lavrov, and just thinking like how far we've fallen since then. Yeah, no, it is in my opinion, it's the coldest our relations have been since the 80s. Also, in my opinion, for good reason. My worry looking forward is, do we start seeing we already have seen consular activities being threatened. Do we start seeing embassy staff getting threatened? And if that's the case, then I'd say it's even colder than it was in the 80s. But I think that's very apt, Michael.
Just to add on to that, I mean, the other thing is if you get the press, and we're talking about misunderstandings and stuff like that, but it's also in a twisted way for the Russians. It kind of, if they can get the Western press out of the area and people who can't report on what's going on within the country, it also adds a little bit to their poker face in the way that they can do public relations with their own sense of just, I mean, they could cause more chaos in a sense where people aren't know what's going on inside the country unless you really get in there. Obviously that's not going to be the full case when it comes to Russia right now, but yeah, like we're talking pre-Gorbachev, Chernenko, guys who were running the KGB or from the KGB running the place against Reagan, levels of Cold War kind of relations.
And so 2 points. One is that article from Commerçant interview with the American ambassador to Russia saying relations are at the lowest point. It's now the first item in the nest, thanks to people in the background for digging it up and Jacoby for posting it. And that idea of harassment of consular staff, even little things have happened. Like there was a report that the Anglo-American school where the children of many of the diplomats attended has been closed. So that might be low-level harassment, but it strikes me that that's the sort of thing that would be the start of it. Aaron, go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, people that don't know, Able Archer, it seems so real. It was such an in-depth exercise with West Germany and the United States and with NATO operators that, the Russians thought it was real. It was 1983. It's like, if we'd gone that far back, we have something to really be concerned about. But I think that, certainly on the nuclear front, we're not seeing any much movement or escalation in alertness as far as the nuclear triads of either the Russians or, of course, or the United States. But of course, this, obviously scrapping the START treaties and New START, these are concerns because then where is the planning for descaling down and decreasing nuclear weapons and proliferation? I mean, again, we could definitely see on the Russian side a massive rise in developing of new nuclear weapons. And yes, they are developing new systems. They don't have a lot of the newest systems in service, but again, where is this? Where's the control? Right? Where's the framework of control? And I think I don't think it's going to get. They're going to get carried away, but I think the Russians are going to be in the future utilizing more of the nuclear tactics for its military basis because they have to rely on those more to be viewed as a strong military power because of debunking of the Russian army as a very capable force, right? So that's another concern as well.
Thanks, Aaron. So I do have one or two more points I just want to run through on the political prisoner issue. It's generated some great input, so I appreciate that. I do want to get to some of the Ukraine updates. So going fairly quickly, just because you see reports of this like in isolation, and maybe people might not realize it seems like it's a new strategy. Again, using the criminal system in Russia in an attempt to intimidate or persecute, there's been a trend of launching charges in absentia. And so if you look in the nest, items 2, 3, and 4 are about recent charges that have been placed in absentia. The first was against the Ukrainian, the head of the Ukrainian intelligence directorate, Kirilo Budanov. He was arrested in absentia. You know, I can understand charging somebody in absentia, but I mean, if you don't actually take a person into custody, I don't know how you arrest them in absentia, but in any event. So Budanov, it's odd to me they would press criminal charges against him, given that they're literally at war and he's a military commander, but in any event. The third item back was they have pressed charges against suspects in the killing of Daria Dugina in absentia. Again, unexpected, but okay. And then finally, they also placed charges against Christo Grozev. And I think in his case, it wasn't merely placing charges, but they actually held a trial and convicted him. And I think they sentenced him to several months if they can take him into custody. And so, you know, as absurd as it is for them to be pressing these against foreigners, it is an attempt at intimidation. And those sorts of tactics were part of the basis of Bill Browder's book, Red Notice, because for those of you who don't know, a red notice is a notice that's sent out to Interpol, the International Policing Organization, saying that someone is wanted in a country of a member state. The idea being that if that wanted person comes into your country, please hold them, and then we will attempt to have them extradited to our country. And so what happened was, in Browder's case, after his lawyer and friend Magnitsky was killed, and he began to go on this crusade to find justice, he upset Putin, and they pressed charges against Browder, and so a red notice went out for him. And so he was actually held more than once at airports in various countries as this red notice hung over his head. And so this idea of trying these people in absentia, I think there was controversy in that Interpol opted not to remove Russia as a member at this time, but I don't think that their red notices are being implemented to the extent that Browder has said he's now traveling freely, and several countries that previously would give him a hard time are no longer doing that. So I don't know that it's specifically that tactic, but it's just this idea of, well, if the Russians can convince somebody to hold you, then you may be extradited to Russia to spend time in prison. So it may not be purely a political statement. Quickly, the other points I was hoping to speak to are initiatives to help out some of these Russian political prisoners. Most of this, they relate either to diplomatic efforts or sanctions. I'll put them up and speak to them quickly. Hopefully I can get through them in just a minute or two. Okay. So this may relate to points that Jacoby made several minutes ago about the idea of trading. And so the United States has this concept of, let me find the term for it, unlawfully or wrongly detained as a specific status that can be declared for a given person who has been detained. And so just the items I put in the nest as they're populating, just the first is a call to the idea, it's the post by Sam Green, a call to the idea that if you forget about a political prisoner, then they will languish, and that it's important to keep pressing the matter and not to just, let it drop. And I think that's important to start as the framing. The second item in the nest, the United States State Department has an initiative called the Without Just Cause Initiative, that to that end, they're attempting to raise awareness of political prisoners around the world. And so I think that's a worthwhile initiative. It was highlighted in this thread by the Free Russia Foundation, which I believe is the organization that Garry Kasparov is associated with. So you might be interested in seeing what efforts the Free Russia Foundation is taking to support the U.S. Without Just Cause initiative. So I'll put up, again, this Browder. There's a tweet by Bill Browder. He writes in the Washington Post a little over a week ago about if Kara Mirza, for example, were given the status of unlawfully or wrongly detained, then it would make it easier in U.S. law for the U.S. to actually trade for him. Even though I believe he's a citizen of the United Kingdom, if he gets this U.S. status, then the U.S. may, in fact, trade for him as well. And to that end, it should be populating in the nest just now. It's a tweet by Congressman Steve Cohen in the United States saying that he is individually pushing for this status to be applied to him. So that's one set of initiatives, but that, there's the Without Just Cause initiative. This application of the status and allowing the U.S. to trade would apply to people like Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan because they're U.S. citizens, and may be sparingly applied to people like Vladimir Kara-Murza because I think he has a residence in the United States. But it wouldn't apply to many of the other political prisoners we've talked about who are just Russian citizens themselves and have no nexus to the United States. I'm going to put up one more set of initiative tweets so that you can understand other things that are being done to keep the pressure on. And I'll speak to them in just a moment.
While we wait, Jacoby, did you want to say something?
So while you guys are welcome to weigh in, hopefully those items should all show up in the nest. So it looks like they're there now. So other initiatives to help out political prisoners. Starting with the first item in the nest, it's a tweet by The Arc. And this is an organization that is associated, it's a Russian anti-war NGO, and I believe it's associated with the Free Russia Foundation that I referred to. I think, again, that's Kasparov, excuse me. And they are organizing letter writing campaigns. And so this particular organization hosts them in various places. So if you scroll down thread, many of these specific events happened about a week ago, but I think that they may be organizing them from time to time, and they're, in-person get together, write letters both to your local representatives and to foreign representatives calling on political prisoners to be freed. At the same time, I know that there are, I can't remember the name of the organization off the top of my head, but there are other initiatives. For example, if you want to write directly to some political prisoners, where you can send your letters in, and they will translate them. I think there's one, for example, for Navalny, where you can write in a foreign language and they will translate to Russian. So if I can find that particular link, I'll put it up. But there are these letter writing campaigns as one item. The next is sanctions. And so looking at the second item in the nest, a lot of this continues to be spearheaded by Bill Browder, who got Magnitsky Act laws put in place in many countries. Now his effort has turned to having countries actually use them. And he facilitates that by having people who draw up lists of officials who were involved in unjust prosecutions. In the case of Vladimir Karamurza, his team drew up a name of 31 officials to be sanctioned. And I believe that just yesterday and today, I think it was the United Kingdom passed sanctions on this front yesterday, and the United States did today. So it's nice to see movement on that front. And the third item in the nest notes that a week ago today, the European Parliament also had a vote where it passed by a huge margin, 508 in favor and 14 opposed, that the European Union should also pass Magnitsky sanctions in connection with Vladimir Karamurza's detention. I don't believe the EU has done that yet, but it may be on its way now that the UK and US have passed them. And so the last items up in the nest there, the fourth and fifth, are just the statement about the US passing the individual Magnitsky sanctions. So there's an article by Deutsche Welle if you want some details on it. And then the fifth item is the tweet put out by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. So it's nice to see there is movement sort of on the sanctions front, and that if you want to get personally involved, there are those sort of letter writing campaigns. So I think that wraps up the political prisoners topic. So I'm glad we got to that one. So thanks guys for sticking around for that. I'm hoping to move on to updates, sort of mixed updates coming from Ukraine. And FYI, we'll see how many of them we get through. I think some of these will generate some discussions, so we may only get through a portion of them. My intention is to run the space for about another 40, 45 minutes. But I do encourage you that if any of this next set of conversation interests you, that you come up, whether it be with a comment or a question. To do that, you can request the mic. It's the button in the bottom left of the Spaces window. And just as a bit of a reset, if you've joined us more recently, just a reminder that we're a space that discusses the news, but we do it by drawing pretty heavily on OSINT investigation to sort of accent what we get in the mainstream media. And that we do focus on sort of techniques and tricks a little bit. And a reminder that our next conversation, because I hold these twice a week, our next conversation will be afternoon at 4 p.m. And I had it up earlier, but I'm going to put up the invitation one more time, just in case you want to set a reminder and come to join us then.
And if you are on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe. And if you like what you're hearing on Twitter and want to hear more, or would like to, help out, you are free to retweet the space as well. I know it's not the bottom of the hour, but I am doing the plug. Woo! Uh-oh.
No sound, Michael.
I just got the dreaded connection warning for the space. I don't know if Michael Bond is having technical difficulties. Hopefully we will stay on the air. If not, we will try and reboot in short order. Rather than that, we were going to get into the news of what's going on in the world when it comes to Ukraine, both on the sense of the figures of what we're looking at with Mr. Bond is we're looking at hacker groups. We're looking at our good friend Jack Teixeira and his other lady friend Donbass Davushka, and we're also looking at all the other fun jazz that comes with what's going on. But as a more recent update in the sadder side of the news, there was another air raid that took place this evening in Ukraine. The town of Uman was hit rather hard, with several high-rises being attacked by cruise missiles. As always, we hope people made it out okay, but it is a very sad, very tragic ongoing situation. As with every apartment block, it's kind of a repeat of Dnipro that we're getting footage out of right now. Michael Bond, if you're ready to go ahead and wave.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, yeah. Again, sorry about that, guys. My mic requires a reset every, apparently 45 minutes to an hour. Apologies for that. I really appreciate the help of my co-hosts to, that way I'm not working without a net. We had a couple.
Also do sports updates because it is also stuff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, if you have to go to, I suspect some people might enjoy the sports updates quite a bit. Before I jump into mine, I see a couple of hands. So why don't we go to Neon first, because we haven't heard from Neon yet, and then we'll go to Aaron. Please go ahead.
Hi, Michael, and everyone else. Just gotta get used to this Twitter Spaces thing. Hold on. I could take my hand down then, I guess. Hi, I just wanted to talk briefly back. I missed the cue on the map issues with UA control map and servers maps. But I wanted to just speak to the fact that we at geoconfirm.org have a map that does not rely on Google Maps. So if you have any interest in that, we'd like to continue with the collaboration with UA control maps in case there is any other issues with Google regarding that. So we're proud to host support for them as well as other issues and other conflicts, not just Ukraine. So I believe that the group is now hosting spaces for geolocations, mostly GeoInt, on Syria and other conflicts like CAR and things like that. So in the future, it might expand. So just wanted to throw that out there before we dived into the other thing. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming up to chat.
And we saw you earlier in the space. Obviously, they could get kind of wonky with the spaces, functions, and all that. But thanks for bringing that, because I know we were talking about GeoConfirm, the UA map. So it's good to have somebody who volunteers from GeoConfirm to come by.
So Neon, you mentioned that you guys do have maps that aren't based on the Google Maps. Where would you advise people to go to look for those, or where would you advise they go to find the spaces?
Well, I can only speak to at geoconfirm.org because that's the group that I work for. I haven't accessed too many others, but the Donbass spaces was pretty significant in that it told a history since 2014 of the conflict in Ukraine and the sort of pseudo kind of like support or shadow support that the Russians gave to the separatist governments there. But I'll kick it over to Aaron. It seems like he's got his hand up too.
Sure. Thanks very much. Go ahead, Aaron.
So I put in the nest there, guys, that are one of, you can see now that in Ukraine, one of our 8 Leopard 2A4 tanks in the Ukrainian army is they've been doing some training with them. They're doing what is believed to be now, with the Bradleys, with the M55s, which are basically the Slovenian T55 old remodernized medium tanks. We're seeing there's a lot of brigade training, and there's a brigade in smaller level training all the way up to brigade. The Ukrainian army getting prepared for this counteroffensive, and we know that they're getting more confident with their machines and their maneuvers, and that this is something that is quite important for them as an army. But of course, with this new equipment and the training, it all comes down to tactics, timing, and not just equipment, but hopefully cross training, and they're preparing for something big, and this is probably going to be the biggest counteroffensive of the war thus far. We don't know where and when, and we're not supposed to. That's the point. But this is going to be some really interesting times coming up here this late spring, early summer. Also, is it okay to put in the nest, Michael, the Bauma report invite thing, or the notice thing?
Yep, sure.
Okay.
Yep. So after Aaron and I both hold conversations on Sunday. I do it early in the afternoon, and Aaron in the evening for sort of the more North American crowd. So they're both good talks. So just before I forget, just to say to Neon Handrail, I really appreciate you coming up, and we've had conversations with people volunteering with a couple of orgs, War Translated, and Nalcio came by from the Oryx project. So I appreciate this brief update. At some point, maybe we can speak to you in a little bit more detail about the GeoConfirm project. So I'll reach out to you in the future. So jumping into the general updates, and please do feel free to weigh in if any of this catches your attention. I try to group these things together by broad subject matter. They're not in any particular order other than grouped together. This first set is sort of espionage related, mostly related to the fallout from the Discord leaks. So starting with the fourth item in the nest, Eric Toller, who's been following these matters pretty closely in his work for Bellingcat, put up an interesting thread filled with a lot of detail, because yesterday the U.S. government put up motions for pre-trial detention, and the defense for the alleged leaker also put up a response to the motion. There's all kinds of detail about his background in there, including, his application for security clearances, some run-ins with authority that he had when he was in high school, some difficulty he had in applying for firearms licenses and so on, that all kind of contribute to his mindset. Some included in the motion were photos of his bedroom. One thing that was noted is he had a pennant on his bulletin board that appeared to be a Russian military pennant, which is just a weird thing for a member of the Air National Guard to have in their bedroom, particularly when Russia is invading Ukraine. And so some people are trying to read into that to consider whether he may have had a little bit more ideological motivation than is currently being attributed to it. The next item in the nest is a tweet by Michael Weiss, and he's noting that Donbass Devushka, Sarah Bills, who is allegedly being investigated now, because it's believed the investigation is related to the fact that her Telegram account was one of the first places that the Discord documents were widely leaked to the public, and that some of the documents distributed from her Telegram channel were altered. She is also believed to be the subject of an investigation, particularly because she had been in the Navy for a long time, and apparently during part of the period that she ran the Telegram channel that may have been handling this information. There may be other bases for the investigation, but in any event, I don't know how wise it is, but apparently Ms. Bills went on and did an interview with Russia Today that was quite detailed, and speaks to whether she had Russian citizens working with her and how she handled the information, and whether she had additional insight into the Russian into the U.S. military sort of opinion on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I don't think it was a wise thing for her to do. She's under investigation, but it happened. And Michael Weiss is noting that this, combined with the Discord leaker, suggests that the Pentagon may have some serious work to do in terms of clamping down, checking into what its personnel is doing, in connection with Russia. The next item in the nest is another tweet by Eric Toller. It's on a slightly different topic. It's some background on the release of the leaked documents on Donbass Devushka's Telegram channel, particularly the edited versions. And so there was speculation about were the leaked documents that included estimates of Russian and Ukrainian losses, were those taken and then pro-Russian folks edited them to make them appear that Russia had taken fewer losses and Ukraine had taken more losses? Like, was it people associated with Devushka's channel who did the editing? And Toller's investigation in this thread goes into the fact that apparently there is a troll group that is believed to be pro-Ukrainian, and that they may have actually found the leaked documents on the Discord servers, because it had been leaked to several Discord servers at that point, had found them on Discord, had decided in an effort to troll pro-Russians that they would take the leaked documents, they would edit them, then they would feed them to a pro-Russian account with the idea that the revised casualty figures were so ridiculous that it would be embarrassing to the pro-Russians. And when they offered them to the people who ran the Donbass Devushka account, they leapt at it, they took the documents, and they republished them. So that's a little bit of insight into how the edited documents may have been generated. And that also raises, ethical questions about if you come across leaked classified documents, maybe your first instinct should not be to then alter them and then hand them to pro-Russian groups for trolling purposes. That sounds like not a great idea. Random, go ahead.
I just want to say this as like, we are an OSINT space, and there are good things with OSINT and bad things with OSINT. And the fact that people troll and set up fake documents from actual leaked documents and stuff like that, and the doctoring of that, it immediately reminded me of previous incidents in the past when it came to leaks and doctored leaks and stuff like that. Sometimes if you are involved in OSINT and people know what you're doing. That's not the case with this kid. Obviously, Teixeira leaked a lot of classified stuff, and it's a big problem. But in the past, there have been moments where people who have been tracking OSINT stuff were trolled in response by giving fake info. Obviously, a pro-Ukrainian hacktivist group is not the U.S. government. That's a story for another day. But it involved the B2 spirit in UFOs in Nevada, guys. I'll just gonna leave it there. But the fact of the matter is that there is a lot of stuff that needs to be verified, and the fact that the doctoring of documents and the fact that people fall for it is just proof that it is very easy to put disinformation out there, especially when it comes to people who want to find good news in anything.
Definitely true.
I hope I didn't want to derail the conversation.
No. It's a great point. 2 more points in this sort of group on intelligence matters. So you have to scroll back a little bit in the nest. I think it's the 7th and 8th items. So the 7th item is a tweet by Oliver Alexander, who we have been following here for quite a while for his investigation into the Nord Stream pipeline bombing. And we, in our conversation on Thursday, I noted it was reported that Denmark had something like 120 photographs of ships who were in the area on the days in question, but that they, when asked about it, they announced they were keeping those photographs secret for the time being, essentially for national security purposes. Well, now they have confirmed a little bit more detail about what types of photos they have. And in particular, there was a Russian sort of special purpose craft. It's like I think it's like a recovery ship that is equipped with a mini sub, and it was apparently right at the point where the Nord Stream bombings took place in the sort of 3 or 4 days prior to the explosions. And the Russian government has apparently responded and said that this ship was out in support of a submarine that was involved in military exercises at the time. But Alexander is saying, well, the submarine in question and the ships in that group, it's believed the submarine was involved with in the exercises were nowhere near where the recovery ship was. So he is doubtful that the recovery ship was interacting with the submarine as the Russian government claims. If you'd like to know more about that, you can have a look at his thread, including he publishes a lot of his analysis on his Substack, and a link to his update on these points for his Substack is included there. And so a lot of suspicion has been thrown on 3 or 4 different ships, including the private smaller sailing ship called the Andromeda, and then sort of doubts were raised about that. And then at one point, Alexander was talking about how the ship that originally laid the pipeline may have just been insufficient, and that perhaps one of the breaks in the pipeline may have been accidental. So there have been 3 or 4 different theories that have floated around. I think the answer is we still don't know. But that through investigations like Oliver's, when other theories are put forward that are just untenable, like those put forward by the reporter Seymour Hersh, Oliver, and others like him are doing a great job at saying, well, no, that theory is just impossible. And so while we don't have the actual theory, we have people out there doing a good job at punching holes in alternatives that just are kind of wild. So I'd say keep following Oliver. Maybe we'll get to the truth someday. Last point in the sort of espionage section was the fact that the head of a Russian hacking group was himself hacked. and there were some, they played some attention-grabbing pranks on this guy. But more to the point, when they hacked his computer, they downloaded a whole bunch of his files, and it's reported that these hackers then took the files and gave them to the well-known OSINT group Inform Napalm, and that they are trolling through the data contained in them, which may lead to further basis for criminal charges or connections between the hacking group and the Russian government more formally. So this is a subject that it's sort of a keep your eye on this space as it may develop. I am adding the next batch to the nest. They're also sort of espionage based. It will just take a moment.
I'm going to try this again to remind people to retweet the space if you are appreciating the conversation and the information being shared. And if you have any comment or want to ask any questions about what you're hearing discussed, please do come up and ask for the mic, and we'll try and get you up.
Thanks very much. So I believe it should all have populated in the nest by this point. So on espionage more generally, there was an interesting article written in The Guardian. It's the new first item up in the nest, asking the question, is Russia spying more, or are just more spies being exposed? And I think that the conclusion is that it's mainly that more spies are being exposed right now, and that a ton of that exposure is due to the efforts of Bellingcat and related open source organizations. So if you'd like detail on the theory that it's not more spying, it's just more being caught, check out that article. Mr. Trilobite, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it seems to me that the idea that them being caught more often does make a bit of sense, because in the current environment that we're in versus like 2 or 3 years ago, you sort of had like two like variables playing out. One of the Russian spies being I'd presume being a lot more active, and that would put them at greater risk than they were prior to the invasion. And also, obviously, with presumably American counterintelligence being a lot more active now than they were prior to the invasion.
I think probably all of that's true. And so other ways that Russian espionage has been active. These next ones I think of as of a piece in a way. So these are points about Russia interfering in some of its neighboring countries. So the second item in the nest is Radio Free Europe. That's Mark Krutov. He is, I think, the editor of Radio Free Europe. They apparently exclusively gained access to Russian plans about how Russia took steps to make it look like an offensive could be launched from Belarus, even though they had no strict intention to do that. And so it seems like it was more of a psychological operation. People were speculating, well, perhaps the Russians are just sending some of their forces to train in Belarus, and that's all it is. But apparently, according to these documents, while they received training there, their deployment there was part of a specific plan to cause concern that Belarus may enter the war as well. So I thought that was, quite the break, quite the breaking news. Related to that, third item back in the nest, Michael Weiss. He is part of a group of news organizations. Let me see if I can find. Yeah, so in the second tweet in his thread, many newspapers, including the Kiev Independent, Expressen, Delphi, sort of in the Baltic states, many of those newspapers, apparently collectively obtained access to the Russian administration's strategy documents for how to deal with Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And so he's written it up, and in his case, he went out and got comments in reaction to this Russian strategy from all three of the prime ministers of the Baltic states. So it's, this follows release of some of the Russian plans for interference in the politics of Moldova about a month ago. So, a lot of these Russian positions are becoming public, and it's, quite embarrassing. And I think it's really building resolve in the targeted countries to resist the Russian influence. Similarly, the fourth item in the nest, again by Radio Free Europe, is apparently they also obtained plans to inspire or support rioting in Moldova in a way that they hoped would kick off a revolution that would overthrow the government there, which, of course, is it's not clear to me anyway whether Wagner in that effort was acting separately from the Russian government or whether, it was in coordination with, because Russia clearly has its own direct designs on Moldova's politics. But seeing those three articles come out together, including faking an offensive from Belarus, plans for political interference in the Baltics, and then Wagner wanting to interfere in Moldova, is just showing that, they want to interfere in essentially the politics of all of their neighbors. Last point on espionage, fifth item back in the nest. A few days ago, Sweden announced that they were expelling 5 Russian diplomats, presumably because they were involved in non-diplomatic activities and espionage. This tweet is a link to one of the leading Swedish newspapers that undertook its own investigation, and they name names saying that there are further 13 people who are still active in Sweden who they believe are Russian intelligence officers working in Sweden. And so I thought that was a really interesting example of, journalism, OSINT, whatever you want to call it, working to undermine Russian espionage activities. Okay, next section, which I'm just putting up in the nest, relates to international politics and developments in international politics connected to Ukraine. It will populate in just a moment. The first of which is the phone call that happened between Zelensky and Chinese President Xi. So there's coverage of that from the Financial Times. My understanding, and if you've heard anything about it that differs from this, please do come up and chat with us. But my understanding of this is that not very much substantive developed, that there wasn't very much in the way of specific agreement or promises. That it sounds like the main goal of the Ukrainians was to try to keep the Chinese as militarily neutral and to not be openly supporting Russia with equipment. It doesn't sound like any sort of explicit promises were made, but it strikes me that dialogue is unlikely to have been a bad thing. The second item in the nest, the Chinese released sort of their official statement on the call, and they sort of reiterated points that were spelled out in their peace plan that they released a little over a month ago. And two interesting points in that statement included that they were focused on the idea of nuclear threats not being appropriate, and also making a statement that they have sent some non-military aid to Ukraine. Now, I'll admit I don't know what that has been, but in any event, that's their claim. Okay. The United States responded to the news of this call between Zelensky and Xi, and their comments were generally supportive. But then the Americans went out of their way explicitly to say that they still doubted that the Chinese proposed peace plan was a fully formed or sort of, completely neutrally motivated peace plan. So they sort of were optimistic but skeptical at the same time. Moving on to U.S. news, many of you have probably heard that the U.S. legislature, the House and the Senate, have introduced, with bipartisan support, resolutions that are being referred to as the Ukraine Victory Resolution. And so a lot has been made of this, with the idea that, the United States has expressed significant support for Ukraine militarily, but it has not come out and specifically said that its diplomatic objective is Ukrainian victory. So this would be the first sort of instance of that being made policy. I haven't heard a lot of analysis about the likelihood of it passing. It seems, that it has bipartisan support, and I haven't heard very much criticism of it from actual members of Congress or Senate. So I presume it will pass. But if any of you have seen good analysis of what the likely impact of it will be, how it might change American policy from what it would otherwise have been, either come up and let us know, or please shoot me a DM, because I would love to see some more details on the impact of this. The sort of last of my international news section. I guess before I go to that, Random, go ahead.
Can I just have a brief rant about the Chinese ambassador to France from the news this week? Because this involves the Xi call. Okay. So everybody knows the slight incident that kind of helped Xi Jinping finally call Volodymyr Zelensky. As you are aware, the Chinese ambassador to France went on French television and instead questioned the sovereignty of the Baltic states. Now, you're saying to yourself, "Oh my God, this is an international incident. Why would the Chinese ambassador say this?" Well, let's go into let's go back and talk about this guy for a sec. His name is Liu Xie, or Liu Xie. He is a wolf warrior diplomat, advocate for that. He has a very colorful heritage in the Chinese diplomatic corps. Let's put it that way. There were some interesting comments dating back to his time as the ambassador to Senegal. He really made headway after being the vice mayor of Wuhan, transfer back to the diplomatic corps and go to the Chinese ambassador to Canada, where he accused the Canadians of being racist towards Asian people because they were trying to shut down Huawei, and an assortment of other notable nuggets. He published an op-ed in a Ottawa-based newspaper that day. He also, when he got the posting back to France, wound up posting COVID conspiracies and blaming the U.S. for certain things. And has basically made a name for himself for being one of the crazy sides of the Chinese diplomatic corps. So after questioning the sovereignty of post-Soviet states, he's kind of gotten his comments thrown out by the Chinese Foreign Bureau, is one way to put it. They have tried to distance themselves as much as possible from him, And the easiest way to make that go away in the news is to have Xi Jinping call Volodymyr Zelensky after Volodymyr Zelensky's been trying to get him to talk to him since he visited Moscow. So that's just a rundown of one of the crazier ambassadors from the People's Republic of China.
His comments did not go over well. Brian, thanks for joining us. Do you want to go ahead?
Hello, Michael, and hello, everyone. I did some work on the looking into the House Resolution 322, which you mentioned just now. And you talked about the significance of this, possible significance of this bill. The bill is at least the House version. I haven't reviewed the text of the Senate version of the bill, but House Bill 322 generally talks about that it is the policy of the House of Representatives is expressing that this is the policy, should be the policy of the United States of America to support total Ukrainian victory, including the retaking of all of the territory back to the 1991 borders, which would, of course, would include Crimea. It talks about Russia being held accountable for war crimes associated with this. It talks about the United States participating with the global community in the reconstruction of Ukraine. What I found most notable in that resolution was that it advocated for the formal inclusion of NATO of Ukraine into NATO. And this is something that you may have referred to in the previous space about that Jens Stoltenberg, I believe, had expressed that there seemed to be unanimous support from all of the NATO members to have Ukraine become a member of NATO after they achieve victory in this conflict, in this invasion. So that's in terms of the bill itself. In terms of support, it's noted that it's bipartisan. There are representatives from both parties that are listed as co-sponsors in HR 322. It's a relatively small number of co-sponsors in terms of what people are looking for to try and maximize its chance of being taken up and by the entire House, and of course going through past the next and being passed by the complete House. The next step is to have these bills, both the Senate and the House versions, be taken up by the respective foreign relations committees in both the House and the Senate. And so I think the current effort by supporters is to try to get more co-sponsors and to sort of stack the deck so that these bills are brought to fruition and passed in sort of one omnibus bill that would be, passed by both houses. So that's what I have for you on that.
Brian, thanks very much for that detail. We'll have to keep an eye on it, and if in a future space on Sunday, if there are any developments or you find any more detail, please do come back and update us. Jacoby, go ahead.
And just building a little bit on what Brian said, while it is just a resolution as opposed to actual legislation, so it's sort of a spirit of the House, spirit of the Senate, spirit of the Congress kind of resolution, it is the first of its kind to be put forward. And it also is co-sponsored by the primary co-sponsors of the bill in the House are Representative Joe Wilson and Representative Steve Cohen, both of whom are chairpersons or the heads of the Helsinki Commission, which is, Michael, you just put up a post by them of the text of the resolution, and then we were also talking about them earlier in the context of sharing events that were happening today, one of which was a hearing that was held by the Helsinki Commission on the religious developments and persecution of Orthodox or not persecution, but use of religion by Russia in Ukraine to prosecute their war against Ukraine using religion as a cudgel. And so it's interesting that this resolution is also being put forward by the heads of that commission.
Well, clearly they feel very strongly about supporting Ukraine, but that's a great point. The last of the international points, and I think my aim is to run the space for about 3 hours, and we're just at that point now. So I think after this, I'll wrap up for a moment. I'll note that there are lots of additional updates that we didn't have time to get to. I'll try and push those forward to our conversation on Sunday. If you did want to click through to sort of my agenda that has all the content, if you want to look at what else I included, or if I missed something that you looked at that you were looking forward to, if you scroll all the way to the right of the nest, that first tweet has sort of all the content that we didn't get a chance to get to. So this last point on the international front, one of the major developments coming up in the next 2 weeks is the Turkish election to be held on May 14th. Apparently, Turkish citizens living abroad in advanced polling, that voting has already begun now. And at the moment, the opposition coalition is actually polling very slightly ahead of incumbent President Erdogan. And there will be major impacts because of Turkey's role, both control of the excuse me, both in terms of control of the straits to the Black Sea, but their role in Syria, and they're a member of NATO. They're sort of playing this balancing position. And we, in fact, are thinking about hosting 1 week in advance. So on May the 7th, hosting our Sunday space just on the Turkish election and its potential implications, and getting a couple of Turkish experts in. So if that's a subject that interests you, please, maybe set your reminder for that point. Before I get into it, Austin, your hand was up. Did you want to jump in with something?
Oh, no, I misinterpreted what you were saying. I
think okay,
we
sure.
were starting to talk about the Turkish elections, and I was going to jump in on that, but more than looking forward to the space on that.
Perfect. And we do sort of minor, lesser updates sort of on the, 20-minute, half an hour front, and we've done that a few times, but we're going to have one space that's just on the implications of the election on May the 7th. The point I wanted to speak to, it's now the 8th item back in the nest as the sort of last international point. Rajip Soylu, who is a journalist who covers Turkey very closely, has looked at the opposition coalition's policy positions and set out specifically what are their policies with regard to Russia. And so without going into them in fine detail, because you can read the post, a lot of it is actually status quo, in that they say that while Ukraine needs to be supported in its effort to defend itself against the invasion, that they would not intend to break off either diplomatic or economic relations with Russia. However, they do view themselves as having been too connected with Russia, particularly in reliance on some military equipment, and that it's extremely unlikely that Turkey would be buying significant military hardware from Russia. They had, notably purchased air defense systems that caused a bit of a break with their NATO allies and limited Turkey's ability to buy advanced fighters. But that they would continue to try to play a bit of a balancing role between Ukraine and Russia. And, part of that is to maintain some leverage, highlighting the importance of the Black Sea Grain Initiative. And so in many ways, that's really just status quo. And while people outside of Turkey look at the opposition and, seem to hope that they would rebuild ties, be more supportive of NATO, potentially fast track Swedish accession to NATO. It may do those things, but it sounds like, at least with regard to Russia, it wouldn't be making any significant breaks with existing policy. So with that done, I think we'll wrap up. Before we go, I just want to highlight that we are Exit has done a great job at preparing puzzles that geolocation challenges that allow you to flex a bunch of your sort of research muscles. And I know that lots of people have enjoyed doing those challenges. I've put a link to the challenge that she presented on Sunday up. It sounds like at the moment we're sort of doing one a week to give people a little bit more time to have a look at it. I believe this puzzle also has both sort of an easier version and then a harder or sort of bonus version. So if you haven't done them before, don't be intimidated. Have a look at it, and I think we'll have a quick explanation of the solution on Sunday, and then new puzzle for the next week in Sunday Space. Just a reminder that our next conversation will be on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And I think that's probably going to do it for us for tonight. So thank you very much for everybody who came to listen. Thank you to all of our speakers. I think that all of our speakers are great accounts, and most have been dedicated to the issues. They're interested in OSINT, but most have been dedicated to the issues in Ukraine since the beginning. I'd encourage you to check their profiles out, and I think almost all of them deserve follows. So please do have a look at that. And great thanks to Random and to Jacoby for being my co-hosts. You guys saved me several times tonight, and it would be very hard to hold these spaces without your support. Once again, thanks everybody, and we'll see you on Sunday.